Всім добрий вечір.
On behalf of the brave, on behalf of every father and every mother who waits for freedom, on behalf of our warriors, and paves the way for a new history.
Hello and welcome to Tochnyi Weekly, the show that gets behind the headlines to discuss the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We have an excellent broadcast for you this week. If you could, please do like the stream and subscribe to Tochnyi. We really do appreciate your support. Helps us out a lot. The YouTube algorithm has never really favored Tochnyi. We talk about spicy things that YouTube advertisers aren't super interested in selling their wares on. So we appreciate your guys' support. It really means a lot to us. Also, of course, we have Twitter and a Blue Sky. So if you guys want any updates, you can check us out there. And of course, we also have our website, tochnyi.info. There's a lot of articles and interactive maps and other data and research that we store there. So it's definitely a place to check out if you want a lot more detailed, scientific, as it were, analysis of what's going on with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So we have an excellent broadcast for you this week. First, I will be providing my news report, as I always do. That will be followed by Mr. German Aid to Ukraine's report, who, by the way, just discovered how to give us all title cards. It's a new feature Restream added. It's our Ukrainian streaming software we use. He named all of us. Anyways, then after German Aid to Ukraine's report, we have Stanimir's report on what's going on in the Russian economy. And finally, we have a report about with Mr. Bianade about there's a recent law passed in Ukraine. Made, I think, most of the mainstream media this week. So probably most people who watch the stream regularly are familiar with what's going on generally there. So we'll talk a little bit about what happened there and what the current status is. And then just maybe a few other things that we'll cover. And then finally, we have a Q&A with chat. So chat, if you guys have any questions at any point, you're more than welcome to type in the chat your question, and we'll do our best to answer them when we get towards the end of the stream. So without any further delay, I will go ahead and jump into the news. These are the main headlines as of July 27th, 2025. First up, we have operations. A fire broke out during the night of July 22nd at a major petrochemical site in Russia's Samara region following a long-range drone operation attributed to Ukraine. The targeted complex, the Novokubishev's petrochemical company — Ukraine strikes these things so often I get practice pronouncing these now — is a key part of Russia's industrial and defense-linked manufacturing network. Located approximately 1,000 kilometers from Ukraine, this facility is among Russia's largest producers of chemicals, both used in commercial applications and the development of military-grade materials such as components for munitions and aerial weaponry. According to a Ukrainian Telegram source, the drone operation was carried out by Ukraine's unmanned systems forces and aimed at disrupting production at the Samar-based site. The plant specializes in the manufacture of industrial compounds such as benzene, acetone, phenol, and olefins, all of which have applications in both civilian and military contexts. Russian media confirmed that the refinery, operated by the state-owned Rosneft and responsible for producing more than 20 types of fuel, including jet and automotive products, had sustained damage from the drones. Notably, the site is the sole domestic producer of synthetic ethyl alcohol and para-tert butylphenol, chemicals that serve as foundational inputs in the creation of explosive substances. The facility processes roughly 1 million tons of chemical feedstock per year and is integrated into the broader supply network supporting Russia's military production. Its refinery arm handles over 8.8 million tons of crude oil annually. After the drone strike, a fire was reported at the complex but was brought under control shortly thereafter. Regional authorities in Samar confirmed that there had been an attempted aerial attack and stated that some of the drones involved were intercepted. In response to the incident, local officials imposed a temporary restriction on mobile internet services, likely to support efforts to detect and disable further drone activity in the area. In the early hours of July 26th, Ukrainian drones carried out a precision operation targeting the signal radio manufacturing facility located in Russia's Stavropol Krai. The plant, situated roughly 500 kilometers from Ukrainian-controlled territory, plays a central role in Russia's defense production, supplying critical electronic warfare systems used by frontline aircraft. The operation involved two distinct drone impacts. One strike was directed at a facility containing high-value imported machinery, including advanced computer numerical control systems vital to production capabilities, and the second drone hit a separate structure housing a workshop dedicated to assembling electronic components. This facility is under international sanctions, having been blacklisted by the European Union, the United States, Ukraine, and Japan due to its involvement in military production. The Russian media outlet Astra released footage allegedly showing one of the drone strikes landing directly on a facility building, supporting claims of targeted infrastructure damage. Regional authorities confirmed that industrial sites in the area were hit, with Stavropol Governor Vladimir Vladimirov, what a name, noting that the drone activity sparked a minor fire but did not result in any injuries. Established in 1971, the Signal plant is one of the largest defense manufacturers in Russia's North Caucasian Federal District. It is responsible for producing a range of electronic warfare and weapon control systems and functions as part of the KRET, a key division of the state-owned defense conglomerate Rostec. During the night of July 25th, a widespread drone campaign disrupted rail operations across multiple regions in southern Russia, leading to delays for over 20 trains and causing damage to critical transportation and industrial infrastructure. Russian media outlet Astra, citing data from Russian railways, reported that several railway facilities were affected, particularly in the Rostov and Krasnodar regions. An explosion impacted the overhead contact lines used to power trains, bringing traffic to a halt. According to a regional source, the blast also damaged the station building and broke windows in adjacent residential structures. Russian railways confirmed that 10 trains in the region were delayed, some for as long as 5 hours. Further south in Krasnodar Krai, drones reportedly struck the power infrastructure in the Timashevskaya region, cutting electricity to the area and delaying another 12 trains. Residents in both regions reported sightings of low-flying drones during the night. As far as I'm aware, as of now, that's a bit of an unusual situation for Ukraine to disrupt train traffic, so we'll see if there's more of that in the future. On July 22nd, the Ukrainian Air Force reported that one of its Mirage 2000 fighter jets was lost due to an in-flight technical malfunction. The issue arose during a routine flight mission and was immediately reported by the pilot, who subsequently performed a controlled ejection. The pilot was successfully recovered by search and rescue personnel and is in stable condition. No damage or injuries occurred on the ground as a result of the plane going down. This incident is the first loss of a Mirage 2000 aircraft in Ukrainian service. An investigative commission has been established to determine the cause. Ukraine recently integrated Mirage 2000 jets into its active combat operations. The aircraft had previously participated in defensive missions, including the interception of Russian missile attacks. In one such instance, a Ukrainian Mirage downed a Kh-101 cruise missile during a coordinated Russian strike involving both missiles and drones. This recent loss, while a setback, does not appear to have altered Ukraine's broader plans to expand and utilize its Mirage fleet in both air defense and strike roles. In Mykolaiv, Ukrainian counterintelligence officials intercepted and detained 2 individuals linked to Russia's FSB while they were in the final stages of preparing a coordinated dual bombing near the Regional Territorial Recruitment Center. The Security Service of Ukraine in Mykolaiv announced the operation through its official Telegram channel. The investigation revealed that the plan involved placing 2 improvised explosive devices, the first near the TRC's administrative building and the second nearby, timed to target responders arriving at the scene after the first blast. This approach was structured to maximize physical harm and amplify psychological impact in the strategically important frontline city. The operation was said to be orchestrated by a handler in Russia managing 2 separate operatives in Ukraine. The first was a 38-year-old man reportedly noticed by Russian intelligence after making public anti-Ukrainian remarks online. He was later recruited and assigned to fabricate explosive devices and conceal them at predestined locations. The second operative was 18 years old and was drawn in with promises of quick financial gain promoted through Telegram channels. Following remote instructions, he retrieved the devices from hidden sites in Kherson and Mykolaiv and planted them, one in a trash bin near the Mykolaiv Territorial Recruitment Center and the other close by. He was detained by SSU agents while placing explosives, preventing the attack just before its execution. Authorities also found the young man in possession of a mobile phone configured to stream the detonation live, presumably to provide visual confirmation to the handler and other observers on the Russian side. Legal action has been initiated against both suspects. The younger of the 2 has been charged under Ukrainian criminal statutes related to attempted acts of mass violence. The older suspect has been charged with high treason committed under wartime conditions. Both are currently held in pretrial detention with no possibility of release on bail and could face sentences ranging from 12 years to life imprisonment, along with confiscation of personal property. Ukrainian cyber specialists from the country's main intelligence directorate recently executed a multi-phase cyber campaign aimed at dismantling the digital infrastructure of the Russian-backed administration in occupied Crimea. According to sources within the Ukrainian intelligence community cited by Militarny, the operation spanned several days and began with extensive distributed denial-of-service attacks that disabled critical systems and disrupted network operations throughout the region. While Russian officials were engaged in diagnosing this disruption, Ukrainian cyber units reportedly infiltrated various government platforms, securing access to internal systems and administrative tools. These included digital document management systems such as the Dialog, SED, Dilo, and others, accounting for operational workflows, including their 1C document management, Directum, and Atlas systems. Intelligence sources stated that approximately 100 terabytes of data were extracted from the central servers belonging to the administration labeled as Government of the Republic of Crimea. The harvested data reportedly included classified documents detailing Russian military infrastructure and logistics pathways within the occupied peninsula. A key component of the breach was access to the credentials of Anton Lyaskovsky, who serves as the Deputy Minister of Health in the Russian-controlled Crimean administration. After securing the data, the cyber team initiated a mass deletion protocol that wiped files across a broad range of systems. The impact was felt at both regional and district levels, affecting ministries and subordinate departments tied to the occupation authorities. Russian media later acknowledged the cyber attack, framing it within the context of so-called hybrid conflict operations. In response, the local Ministry of Internal Policy, Information, and Communications confirmed that efforts were underway to restore functionality to the systems, but noted that some public services would remain disrupted for an undetermined period. Up next, we have economy and aid. On July 24th, the U.S. Department of State authorized 2 foreign military sales to Ukraine, totaling roughly $330 million aimed at enhancing Ukraine's capacity to independently sustain and operate key military systems. The first sale, valued at approximately $150 million, is focused on logistical and technical support for Ukraine's M109 self-propelled howitzers. The package includes spare parts, specialized tools, technical training, and other services that will enable Ukrainian forces to perform in-country repairs and maintenance, thereby improving operational readiness and reducing reliance on foreign repair cycles. The second transaction, estimated at $180 million targets Ukraine's air defense infrastructure, specifically existing U.S. supplied systems such as the Patriot. It will provide a range of support services, including upgrades, maintenance, spare components, accessories, as well as technical assistance for both the U.S. government and private contractors. The objective is to enhance the sustainability and effectiveness of Ukraine's existing missile defense assets. These sales follow two separate U.S. military aid packages approved just a day earlier on July 23rd, totaling $322 million. One of those packages included the delivery of Hawk Phase 3 air defense systems, while the other supplies components to maintain and repair Bradley infantry fighting vehicles. Together, these sales and grants are part of a broader U.S. strategy to transition Ukraine towards self-sufficiency in maintaining advanced weapon systems. Romania is moving forward with plans to launch a joint drone manufacturing initiative with Ukraine, aiming to establish domestic production capabilities and export drones to other European markets. The Romanian Defense Ministry confirmed the project's intent during a recent briefing with the press and indicated that the defense minister will soon engage in formal discussions with his Ukrainian counterpart to advance collaboration. Initial output from the facility is expected to serve Romania's own defense needs, with surplus units intended for sale to other European countries. This approach reflects similar arrangements Ukraine has established with Denmark and Norway, aimed at regional drone production and defense cooperation. However, the timeline for implementation may be affected by Romania's current defense budget constraints. The project may not move into the operational phase until 2026, when a new budget cycle is expected to provide the necessary funding. The World Bank will provide an additional $116 million in grant funding to help restore and modernize the heating and energy systems in 7 Ukrainian cities where critical infrastructure has been severely damaged by Russian strikes. The funding agreement was announced by Ukraine's Ministry for Communities and Territories Development and aligns with commitments made during the Ukraine Recovery Conference of 2025. The cities targeted for support, Kharkiv, Sumy, Chernihiv, Mykolaiv, Kryvyi Rih, Kremenchuk, and Slavuta, have experienced extensive damage to district heating and power systems due to sustained aerial and missile attacks. The new funding is part of a second phase of the Restoration Project of Winterization and Energy Resources, which focuses on improving the resilience of urban energy infrastructure ahead of future cold seasons. The grant will be used to acquire gas-powered cogeneration units, specialized vehicles, and essential equipment and materials for emergency repairs and long-term upgrades in the heating sector. The objective is to secure reliable heat and power for civilian populations during winter, reduce vulnerability to continued attacks, and support broader energy sector stabilization in Ukraine. Ukraine will receive a reduced payout from the European Union under the Ukraine Facility Mechanism due to incomplete progress on key reform commitments. The fourth installment, initially expected to total €4.5 billion, has been cut to €3 billion, according to a European Commission spokesperson. Ukraine formally requested a partial disbursement on June 6th, asserting that it had met 13 out of 16 reform benchmarks required for the full tranche. The Commission reviewed the submission and confirmed the implementation of those 13 reforms, recommending the partial payout to the European Council based on the EU's policy of conditional payments. The reforms that remain outstanding involve further steps towards decentralization, the appointment process for judges to the High Anti-Corruption Court, and legislative changes concerning the Asset Recovery and Management Agency. These are considered critical components of Ukraine's institutional integrity and anti-corruption framework. Mercer noted that under the current rules, funding tied to incomplete reforms is not permanently lost. If Ukraine meets the remaining requirements within 12 months, the withheld portion of the tranche can still be disbursed. The Ukraine facility was launched in February 2024 as a 4-year initiative to support Ukraine's economic stability and reconstruction efforts. It includes €33 billion in loans and €17 billion in grants. Progress on the Ukraine plan, a detailed reform roadmap linked to EU accession, is a prerequisite for continued funding. This roadmap encompasses areas such as governance, judicial reform, economic modernization, and post-war recovery. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen recently announced the EU's intention to double its financial commitment by proposing an additional €100 billion for Ukraine in the 2028 to 2034 long-term budget. On July 21st, the United Kingdom introduced a new round of sanctions targeting 135 oil tankers and 2 maritime companies associated with Russia's covert oil export operations, often referred to as the Shadow Fleet. According to the British government, these tankers have collectively moved an estimated $24 billion worth of oil since the beginning of 2024, circumventing international restrictions through obscure ownership structures, foreign registries, and insufficient insurance coverage. Among the sanctioned entities is a company linked to Lukoil, a major Russian oil producer. The UK Foreign Secretary stated that the new measures are intended to weaken the logistical and financial infrastructure supporting Russia's overseas oil trade, which remains a key funding source for its military activity in Ukraine. This action follows the UK's recent agreement to participate in an EU initiative that reduces the price cap on Russian seaborne oil exports to around $47 per barrel, down from the earlier ceiling of $60. That cap was originally implemented to cut Russian revenues without causing major disruptions to global energy markets. It was reported this week that in December of 2024, an Indian firm delivered approximately $1.4 million worth of the military-grade explosive Octogen, or HMX, to Russia, according to Indian customs data reviewed by Reuters. The shipment proceeded despite ongoing warnings from the U.S. government that such transactions could trigger sanctions under the existing laws aimed at curbing Russia's access to critical military supplies. The recipient in Russia included Promsintens, a known explosives manufacturer with links to the Russian defense sector, as confirmed by a Ukrainian security official. Octogen is a high-energy compound with widespread use in military hardware, including missile and torpedo warheads, rocket propulsion systems, and plastic explosives. U.S. defense sources consider it a key material in advanced weapon systems and have described it as essential to Russia's military capabilities. Although the U.S. Treasury has the authority to impose sanctions on entities facilitating the supply of such substances to Russia, no specific penalties have been publicly announced related to this particular shipment. Legal experts consulted by Reuters confirm that the export of Octogen falls within the scope of U.S. secondary sanctions, meaning that foreign companies and financial institutions involved could face penalties even if operating outside U.S. jurisdiction. An Indian government source acknowledged that Octogen has limited civilian applications in addition to its military uses and emphasized that the shipment did not breach Indian regulations. India's Ministry of External Affairs stated that all dual-use exports are reviewed under a framework designed to comply with international non-proliferation norms and national laws, including a comprehensive evaluation of export risks. While the U.S. State Department declined to comment on the specific transfer reported by Reuters, it reiterated that Washington has consistently cautioned Indian firms and authorities that military-related trade with Russia may result in sanctions. A Dutch court has overturned earlier seizure orders on local assets belonging to Russian energy firm Gazprom, which had been frozen following legal action by 2 Ukrainian companies. According to Reuters, the decision published on the court's website was based on the legal principle of state immunity, which protects sovereign entities from being subjected to foreign court jurisdiction without their consent. The ruling affects shares held by Gazprom in Dutch-based gas firms Wintershall Noordzee and Gazprom International Projects BV, which were seized in September of 2024 as part of compensation claims by Ukrainian agricultural firms Slavotij Invest and Jvina. These companies had initiated legal proceedings to recover damages linked to losses incurred as a result of Russia's military actions in Ukraine. While Ukraine has successfully pursued similar legal actions in other jurisdictions, including a notable arbitration award in favor of state energy company Naftogaz over assets seized in Crimea, the Dutch court ruled that enforcing asset seizures against a company considered an extension of the Russian state could breach international immunity protections. This legal shield prevents states and their property from being targeted through foreign legal systems without explicit consent. That seems crazy to me that you can buy shares in a company, and if you're a state-owned company, then you have complete legal immunity. That seems crazy to me, but whatever. In March of 2024, Gazprom had reportedly attempted to divest the contested Dutch assets, setting an initial sale price of €334 million for its stake in Wintershall Noordzee and its full ownership of Gazprom International UK Limited. However, the attempted sale was blocked due to ongoing legal claims. Up next, we have international relations. Azerbaijan has officially identified the individual responsible for downing the Embraer ERJ-190 passenger aircraft near Grozny in December of 2024, a tragic incident that resulted in the deaths of 38 people. According to Minval Politica, the commander who launched the missile was Dmitry Sergeyevich Paladichuk, head of the No. 274 Squadron.
He currently serves within the 1st Division of the 80th Anti-Aircraft Missile Regiment, which belongs to the Mobile Reserve of Russia's 14th Army, military unit number 75564. Man, that guy is called out. Despite over 7 months having passed since the incident, no disciplinary or legal actions have been taken against those involved. The flight was operated by Azerbaijan Airlines and was en route from Baku to Grozny when it declared an emergency at approximately 11:20 a.m. local time. Despite distress signals and repeated requests to land, all Russian airports reportedly denied the plane permission to touch down. The aircraft was then instructed to continue flying across the Caspian Sea toward Kazakhstan. Passenger videos confirmed that the aircraft was experiencing technical issues during the flight. Azerbaijani officials have since stated that the plane was subjected to electronic interference, allegedly from Russian electronic warfare systems, which disoriented its navigation. Shortly after, the tail of the aircraft was struck by ground-launched munitions. Photographic evidence circulated in Russian media shortly after the incident showed remains of a 57E-6E missile stage, which are standard for the Pantsir S-1 system, supporting claims that such weapons were active in the area at the time of the crash. The strike led to the death of 38 people, including 23 Azerbaijani citizens, 7 Russians, and 6 Kazakhs. In the immediate aftermath, Russian authorities issued conflicting explanations and have not officially accepted responsibility. President Ilham Aliyev publicly accused Russia of downing the plane and called for a formal admission of fault, an apology, and a transparent explanation of events. Due to what it views as a lack of accountability and credible inquiry, Azerbaijan has refused to allow the Interstate Aviation Committee, a body largely composed of Russian officials, to handle the investigation. Instead, Baku is pushing for an independent international commission to carry out an impartial and transparent review of the incident. And last item for me this week. On July 23rd, Russian and Ukrainian delegations convened in Istanbul for a third round of confidential peace talks. The session lasted under an hour and produced limited outcomes. Though both sides confirmed a new prisoner exchange had taken place, they clarified that this had been arranged during the previous negotiations held on June 2nd. The most concrete result of the latest meeting was an agreement to proceed with another prisoner exchange in the near future, alongside continued discussion of broader ceasefire terms and a possible summit involving national leaders. Ukrainian National Security and Defense Council Secretary Rustem Umerov, who led Kyiv's delegation, stated at a press conference that Ukraine had proposed holding a leaders' summit before the end of August. The proposed meeting would include President Zelensky, Putin, Trump, and Erdogan. According to Umerov, the goal would be to establish the foundation for substantive peace talks through top-level diplomatic engagement. The Russian delegation head rejected the idea of a summit under current conditions. He argued that a meeting between presidents would only be appropriate once the terms of the peace agreement were finalized, not as a forum for negotiation. He emphasized that their positions remained significantly divergent, although both sides did agree to maintain contact and continue discussions. One key element of the talks was the exchange of peace memorandums, a process that began during the June 2nd meeting. Despite limited progress, the Russian delegation noted that Russia proposed establishing 3 online working groups focused on political, humanitarian, and military matters. He also reiterated Russia's suggestion of implementing temporary humanitarian pauses, 24 to 48 hours in length along the front lines to facilitate medical evacuations and the recovery of the dead. Regarding humanitarian matters, both parties announced plans for a prisoner exchange involving at least 1,200 individuals. Ukraine also raised the issue of children deported to Russia, and the Russian delegation responded that some children had already been returned and that efforts were ongoing to identify legal guardians or relatives to facilitate the return of others. He also claimed that Ukraine is holding around 30 Russian civilians who had been evacuated during a recent cross-border incident in the Kursk region. Shortly after the meeting, the Russian Defense Ministry confirmed that a prisoner swap had been completed in line with the agreements made in June. While no figures were provided, President Zelensky confirmed the return of several seriously ill or wounded soldiers. He stated that more than 1,000 Ukrainians had been repatriated under the Istanbul negotiation framework, including some who had been in captivity for over 3 years. He added that these individuals would receive full medical and psychological support. And that's it for the main headlines this week. We will now move to the next segment.
Yeah, and that would be me. Hello, guys. As always, I will now present this week's most important news from Germany regarding Ukraine. We are starting with an announcement by the British Ministry of Defense made on Monday. The British MOD said that Germany will provide more than 170 million euros in funding, which the UK will use to procure air defense ammunition via the UK-led International Fund for Ukraine for delivery in the coming months. On Thursday, financed by the German government, The State Border Guard Service of Ukraine received 5 soil vibratory compactors, Mercedes-Benz Arox truck crane, generators, and water filters from the German Federal Agency for Technical Relief, THW. On the same day, Hensoldt announced that they have been contracted to deliver an undisclosed number of TRM-4D air surveillance radars and Spexer 2000 3D Mark III short-range radars for more than 340 million euros to Ukraine. Although it's not officially confirmed, it's more than just likely that Germany is paying for the deliveries, as Germany always financed the Hensoldt deliveries. And last but not least, on Friday, a spokesperson for the Ukrainian embassy in Germany told me, upon inquiry, that the 8th IRIS-T SLM fire unit financed by Germany will arrive in Ukraine in the near future. However, she didn't confirm that the fire unit is currently being delivered, so in the process of being delivered, as several media organizations had reported prior to this, based on a statement of the Ukrainian ambassador to Germany, Oleksiy Makiev. Nevertheless, the delivery schedule agreed upon between the, quote, German partners and the Ukrainian side can and will be honored, according to the spokesperson. And yeah, that's my segment. So back to you, Joseph.
No footage. That's cool. All right. So next up, we have Stanimir's segment. Yeah. So there's been a lot going on this week. So we wanted to start with a couple things. So first off, Mr. Stanimir, I think we wanted to start with there's some new reports that came out from the Russian aviation authorities on what's going on with their airport. So why don't we start there, buddy?
Yeah, so we got the data for last week, and it turns out that it's as bad as the previous major outage that they reported. So basically, between July 19th and 22nd, the Moscow airports and the St. Petersburg airport of Pukovo canceled 517 flights. This affected 75,000 people. 169 flights were redirected, and 16,000 people had a refund issued. 109,000 drink vouchers and 58,000 meal vouchers were issued. So overall, it looks like as bad as the previous week. And we have to report that last time they said that the damages for the airlines were estimated at between 17 and 23 billion rubles. So on the average, it's around $250 million in losses for just 2 days or 2.5 days.
Yeah, so obviously not good news for the Russian airports. The next item is that's it for the airport report.
Well, I have to say that this weekend, there's been less disruptions, but they had to redirect around 20 flights because of Pukovo and St. Petersburg being closed down 3 times. I think being closed down for several hours. Grozny was closed down 3 times in the same day, and I think they had major disruptions in all the airports over the Caucasus during the last few days. So, and also Kaluga was closed off for several hours. Not as bad, but it's becoming the norm to have closures of airports because of drone threats.
Man, I remember the last time there were drones in near Grozny. Kadyrov freaked out, and he was he basically made up that there were 1,000 Ukrainian prisoners being held in Grozny, and then he would start executing them because if they didn't stop droning Grozny.
Yeah, but right now he wasn't able to do that because he's in a hospital in Turkey. He went into the water in boredom and didn't come out on his own.
Yeah, we will definitely cover Chechnya, I think, at some point if there's any developments there, because that's been brewing for a while. We haven't really looked in on Chechnya in a while, so it'd be interesting. But yeah, any other news about the airports, or we got a lot to get through, eh?
Yeah, we have a lot to get through. I think that's it for the airports this week.
Okay, and then so next we got some reports in mainstream media that Russia lowered its interest rate, I think 2% from 20% to 18%. Is that correct?
Yes, they lowered it by 2%, but again, this is not as low as the market hopes for. What the banks were hoping for is to lower it below 14% or to get there. Eventually, that's what German Graf from Sberg has been saying. VTB also has similar expectations for the interest rate to fall to below 14 or 16% this year. So they're still not happy because the Russian stock market actually went down after Nabulina said that they were lowering the interest rate. So in this case, the Russian market expects more because 18% is still too high for investment to resume.
Gotcha. So the tension there is that certain people don't want the interest rate lowered because they're worried about runaway inflation, but certain people do to keep the economy like moving. Is that the tension there? Like why it wasn't lowered?
Yeah, that's basically the thing. Nabulina doesn't want to lower it as quickly as they want because she fears inflation will ramp up once people see that their deposits are not as profitable as before. There's a lot of Russian money held up in deposits right now because of the high interest on deposits. But at 18%, she considers that this is still high enough for people to find deposits attractive. All the banks lowered their interests on loans and deposits significantly this week, by the way. When it comes to loans, they were lowered from 4 to 1%, depending on the different loan product. For cash loans, they're still high, though.
Gotcha. So yeah, anything else about the interest rates, or I think that's pretty straightforward. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay, and then we just had I guess two sort of domestic news items. I guess I could have lumped this one in with the airport, but we don't really have much information about it. There was a major passenger plane crash in the far east of Russia, and as far as we know, all 48 people on board lost their lives. It seems like probably just either a bad incident or maybe partially indicative of the state of Russia's current air fleet, but. I don't know. Was there anything in the local Russian media that was worth noting about that incident?
No, only that they found the black box and they're now reviewing it. It was an older plane, an An-24. They don't make these anymore. But other than that, there's nothing concrete so far.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's I would say not usual for a plane to go down in the Far East, but it's not unheard of for a helicopter or certain other things. So it could just be a bad accident. But I guess we'll learn more. Go ahead.
They've had a lot of accidents in the Far East. Even one of the companies that provides air travel via helicopters lost its license because it wasn't following safety procedures. I think it was early this year or late last year. So they've had accidents there. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And then this one's just a little, I guess, funny, but also sort of, I think, indicative is this week, the Russian Supreme Court declared the International Satanist Movement a extremist organization. I think that was probably mostly a political stunt. I don't think that the International Satanist Movement has a lot of influence in Russia. I assume by International Satanist Movement they mean the Anthony LaVey guys, but I don't know. Yeah, I don't know anything worth remarking upon about this. I think it's just indicative that Russia is increasing. Obviously, since they've been naming people extremist organizations for a long time, but it's been ramping up since the full-scale invasion started, and I think we're at a real fever pitch now where they're naming extremist organizations everywhere they look.
Yes, but there's a different thing that happened this week with extremist organizations. So Putin signed a law that says that any organization which has a member of it, an extremist, is now declared an extremist organization. So, for example, if you have a group chat for your apartment building and one of the people inside your apartment building is declared an extremist, you are all members of an extremist organization. That's the extent of the law that they just approved. So while that news about the Satanists was what grabbed the headlines, what happened in Russia was more dire, as now there's an expansion of the term who is an extremist and who can be charged with criminal activities for being part of an extremist organization. That's part of the ramping up of hunts against people who search for content that Russia considers extremist, as this can be used to, let's say, everyone in your chat group is now part of an extremist organization, and all that content is now extremist. So you asking when the water is coming back up might be declared an extremist content.
I understand. And if I remember correctly, the Putin was like asked about this, and basically the obvious answer he gave was like, this won't affect normal Russians, blah blah blah. But didn't that happen where he was asked about it and he said like he made some remarks?
He asked the Minister of Digital Development to explain to people how this will work. So initially they're saying that it's going to only cover certain extremist content, that the authorities have to prove intent. But given how Russian authorities actually arrest people and prosecute them, I don't think they'll be working very hard to prove intent. And courts will just rubber stamp it, probably.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think like it's obvious that Putin's going to say something to calm people down. I think that's sort of in and of itself kind of a statement about the dangers of this. And I think you're totally right that the letter of the law here is pretty clear that what you said is true, that like you could be in a WhatsApp group with an extremist and the law now has the authority, as it were, to like declare you part of an extremist organization. So whether or not Putin says, don't worry about it, bro, that doesn't really matter, right? But yeah, it's just wanted to mention that he did make some remarks about that, because I think that in and of itself is sort of significant. It implies that Russians are worried about it and that he felt a need to come out and say something. So yeah, I think that's anything else you wanted to say about this domestic extremist stuff?
Well, it's going to go into law if everything carries on the same way it has been. It's going to go into law on September 1st, I think. So they have some time to, let's say, flee the country, I guess. Beyond that, the way it was proposed as part of the amendments to a traffic law in the second reading. So people were not able to read the law and react accordingly fast enough, and they were just going to vote it without knowing what they're voting. That's a tactic the Kremlin uses when it wants to pass a law quickly and it wants to enforce it quickly. So that's significant in this case. And it was adopted in the third reading last week, I think, on the last day of the Duma session for this summer.
Huh, that's interesting. I wonder, because you'd think in Russia, like, they wouldn't need to really do that. You just tell them to vote and they'll do it. But it implies, I guess, that they need to do this quickly, and so they did it that way. Yeah, so I think that about covers it for the other stuff we wanted to cover, and we just have your general report on Russian economy.
Yeah, but I'll start with some topics that are a bit divergent, or let's say they need to separate segment themselves. So what we learned about the Russian car industry this week is that it's going into the future. They're adopting a 4-day working week, so more progressive than everything else. But the reason they're adopting a 4-day working week is because demand is down. So for AvtoVAZ, they're adopting a 4-day working week for the Lada Granta, Vesta, and Niva assembly lines from September 29th to March 26, 2026. This is already signed into the work schedule of Lada. So next up, we had Kamaz coming out saying that from August 1st, the factory will switch to a 4-day working week. That's because the heavy truck market has shrunk by 60% this year. So that's the vehicles over 14 tons. And lastly, we had Gaz, which came out and said that from August, it's also switching to a 4-day working week. It said that its truck sales are down 40%, LCV sales are down 30%, and bus sales are down 60%. So that's almost the entirety of the major brands in Russia going into a 4-day working week. Now, that doesn't mean that its workers are going to get a 5-day working week payment. They're going to get less, and the aim is to reduce the cost of production while demand is down. Also, what we learned is that the Russian used car market has gone back to the 90s. For those who haven't been in Eastern Europe during the 90s, that means that 80% of the deals for used cars are done in the same way. You call up a guy who has a single-person company, and all he does is import cars from another country. Usually, we're talking about Western or Japanese or Korean cars. You pay him the money. He goes outside of Russia, finds the car you want. He's able to transfer money out of Russia to pay for it, brings it back into Russia, files some dodgy paperwork, and then sells it to you in a way so that you don't pay the high recycling fee for imported cars. In that way, basically, the used car market has become a part of the import substitution. But if they start prosecuting people for doing this because it's not entirely legal and the government is losing money on the recycling fee with the way they file erroneous paperwork, you might start seeing people losing their cars because of the way they're imported. But yeah, they've degenerated to the 90s before the entrance of the big car brands in Russia and the ability to buy Western cars and Japanese and Korean cars without issue, as those are now banned for import or banned for export from the countries they originate, depending on the engine size, or they're just not made in Russia as they used to be. And again, we're talking about secondhand cars, but this is favorable for Russians because the average age of a Russian used car is 16 years. So if you manage to get a 5 or 10-year-old car, that's better than the average for the market. So that's it for the car news. Now we have some additional news when it comes to Russian metallurgy. So there we have a problem with Russian ferrous scrap. The market has collapsed, basically, to the point that a ton of scrap now costs 15,250 rubles, which is around 163 euros for a ton of scrap. Now, they can't export it because there is a quota for export to keep the price of Russian scrap within Russia that's used to make steel cheaper. So electrometallurgical plants can more easily have access to the raw materials they use for production, but this is killing the scrap collecting companies. Even the ones that are subsidiaries of electrometallurgical plants are looking for new customers because the plants they're attached to don't have enough demand. And so the drop is from 17.7 million tons of scrap collection in 2024 to an expected 12%, not 12%, but 12 million tons in 2025. So by 1/4 is the scrap collection going to fall down in Russia this year. And in metallurgy, the demand is expected to drop another 20% this year as well. For the metallurgical plants that are using electrical furnaces, we also have additional news. The Chelyabinsk electrometallurgical plant is going to adopt a 4-day working week from September 1st at all its plants. So we are already seeing this drop in demand for Russian steel directly affect the industry and people cutting down production times. At least the electrometallurgical ones, they can do that relatively easier compared to the other forms of steel production within Russia. We also had the industry data for the month of June 2025. So it surprised me because the growth in output was 2%. I expected it to be lower, but it's because munition production went up from being up 4.4% in May 2025 compared to 2024 to up 17% in June 2025 compared to June 2024. Electronics production, which is usually the proxy for guidance systems for drones and similar things, its growth dropped down from 21% in May to 12.9% in June. Armored vehicle production also went down. It was at an all-time high of 55.4% up in May compared to May 2024. Now it's up only 23.7%. And the other fast-growing sector is medication output, where growth is down from 11.2% to 7.4%. We have a spike in oil and coking coal, so oil products and coking coal in June. So they were growing at 1.8% in May, and now they're growing by 5.6%. But apart from that, all of the civilian industry is actually contracting. And we saw that in the automotive production, we saw a contraction of 29.8%, which is even higher than the 27% in May 2025. So beyond that, we had an interesting news that the Russian Agricultural Ministry is considering setting up a sort of a price fixing procedure for essential goods. What they'll have a calculation formula for the price, and they'll introduce that into the long-term supply contracts for essential goods from producers to supermarket chains. Because currently they just agree on volume, and then every delivery has an auction system where the price is different, and that causes problems for the agricultural producers. They're hoping that this will stabilize prices somewhat for the producers and for the people who are buying from the supermarkets. But in a way, it's a return to price fixing from before the 2000s. Also, the Ministry of Defense proposed to increase the service member salaries from October 1st, not by the previously agreed 4.5%, but by 7.6%. However, the Ministry of Finance said that there's no money for that, and they're completely against that change. So likely that in this case, we might see the Ministry of Finance win and the proposal get shut down, and salaries are going to be indexed by below what the expected inflation is for 2025. When it comes to banking, we saw that the average size of mortgages decreased in June 2025 by 2% to 4.5 million rubles. And the total volume of mortgages issued in June rose by 9% compared to May 2025, reaching 323.6 billion rubles. In grain, there is a problem in Rostov region because due to the drought and late frost, its harvest of grain is going to be 40% lower than expected. So around 8 million tons versus 11.4 million tons initially expected. The losses are currently estimated at over 7.8 billion rubles. And they're also going to start reducing the livestock they have because there's not going to be enough feed in the region for said livestock because of the lower yield and lower harvest. Also, this is important because Rostov is the region from which you expect Russia to export grain, not so much from the other central regions and Siberian regions. So this would mean an immediate impact on Russian grain exports for 2025-2026. Furthermore, the Russian Ministry of Agriculture is trying to get China to adopt a duty-free quota for Russian grain. So currently, China is almost not importing any Russian grain. In the first half of 2025, Russia exported only $2.5 million of grain, which is 19 times less than in the first half of 2024. But historically, China has imported grain from other sources, including Ukraine, rather than from Russia, and has imposed an import duty on Russian grain to prevent it from entering the market. When it comes to metals, like we said, the industry is suffering. For demand in the first half of 2025, it's fallen by 14 to 15%. By the mechanical engineering and by the energy sector, it's fallen by 25%. Demand in the construction sector has decreased by 13%, and this is vital because it generates 70% of the demand for Russian steel domestically. And in the second half of 2025, another 10 to 12% drop is expected. When it comes to coal, we got the results for the first 5 months of 2025. So the balanced loss of Russian coal companies for that period from January to May 2025 is 136.2 billion rubles. So close to $1.8 billion. And for comparison, in 2024, they had a 9.1 billion ruble profit when you combine the net loss and net profit of all companies. The number of coal companies that reported losses increased from 50.9% to 64.9%, and the number of companies that were profitable both dropped from 49.1% to 35.1%, so a significant drop. When it comes to gas and oil, this week Russia mostly had a domestic problem. They are going to ban all gasoline exports from Russia due to the high wholesale price of A95 gasoline, which on Thursday for a bit went over 77,000 rubles per ton on Spimex. This has been primarily caused by the Russian refineries exporting gasoline because they have the right to do that and not providing enough on the internal market, which has forced independent gas stations, which don't have links directly to refineries, to have unprofitable sales of gasoline over the week and the past week as well. So the expectation is that they'll introduce a full ban and they'll force companies to sell more on the internal domestic market. In the construction market, the amount of apartments in new apartment buildings that are under construction in Russia for the first half of 2025 increased by 12% to 22 million square meters. However, the sales of such apartments dropped by a significant amount to 10.4 million square meters, a lot lower than in 2024, again, due to the high interest rate and the high cost of mortgages. And also the Russian real estate developers decreased their purchases of furniture by 20 to 25% to 70 to 75 billion rubles. For comparison, in 2022 and 2023, up to 25% of the housing that was being sold was sold with furniture, and they were spending around 100 billion rubles a year on furniture. Now, for interesting data points that I saw this week, we have the share of Russian companies that plan to reduce their staff has doubled. However, it's doubled from a low base, so it's now 11.5%. And the number of companies that plan to raise salaries has gone down from 84% to 71%. And the median wage growth has gone down from 8.4% to 5.3%. So they're going to be raising salaries by significantly less, and a lot more people are going to lose their jobs in this year. Furthermore, another interesting data point from Moscow's airports, the CEO of Domodedovo has said that the facility is near bankruptcy. It's got 70 billion rubles in debt, and in 2025, it has to make 8 billion rubles in payments for those debts. So that's something that no other facility of this kind has actually been candid about. And we might see that after it was nationalized, the facility has actually gone downhill since then. And according to Rosstat, the balance profits of organizations in May 2025 was only 1.76 trillion rubles. This means that it's 49% less than in May 2024, and that's significant because this is the major factor for the Russian budget. The less net profit they have, the less revenue the budget has, and that's starting to decrease significantly over the last few months. When it comes to inflation and debt, one of the reasons why Nabiullina was more confident to lower the interest rate by as much is that the inflation for the last period that was reported was actually a deflation of 0.05%. So prices actually went down. And for July, then the inflation has been 0.76%. And for the year so far, 4.56%. Also, the Russian Ministry of Finance managed to sell 2 auctions of debt. The first one with 81.5 billion rubles at an interest rate, or yield, not interest rate, a yield of 14.47%. And the second auction was again a lower yield one at 14.8%, but a smaller auction as well at 25.5 billion rubles. And that's it from me for this week.
Well, thank you, Stanimir. It's an interesting week for Russia and the Russian economy. Next segment is a segment I never like to do because it talks about Ukrainian politics. And I think that one of the things that this whole invasion is about is the right for Ukraine to kind of determine its own political future. And obviously, certain things happen in politics of like all of our own countries that we, disagree with or and so forth. So usually it kind of the day-to-day politics of Ukraine, doesn't really have an impact on the full-scale invasion and kind of what's going on. But this week, something pretty significant happened. It was widely reported on in the Western press, so I don't think people are unfamiliar. But we'll do our best to give more of like a comprehensive overview of what's going on, myself and Mr. Bionade. So first, I've been tasked with providing just like a sort of a high-level summary of kind of some stuff, and then we'll talk a little bit about the kind of reaction to what happened with Bionade. So I'll start by saying that several years ago, as part of Ukraine's effort to align its government towards the European Union, it created a program to have a special investigative unit and a special prosecutions unit for high-level corruption cases. And they're called NABU is the investigations unit, and SAPO is the anti-corruption unit. We won't worry about what the acronyms mean. So NABU and SAPO were created. Their only job is to go after like the big fish, high corruption cases, to get the highest level people and find the most money. And that's been their task since they were created. I want to say around 2019, but maybe a little further than that. And they've sort of been plugging away at that since then. So in July of 2025, Ukraine passed a law that significantly alters the structure of the system that they put in place. And it was something that was voted on. There was another law going through Parliament that was about like missing people, and this was like attached to that law. So in other words, like this wasn't a law that was passed in like the sort of normally expected way, I guess, in the Ukrainian Parliament. It happened, I would say, in most people's perspective, kind of suddenly, because it happened as part of a rider on this other bill that was being considered. And what the bill does is it gives the prosecutor general, who is appointed by the political party in power, which is the Servant of the People Party in Ukraine, direct authority over both institutions, NABU and SAPO. Up until now, they basically had independent appointments kind of running those institutions. This includes the power to assign cases in the investigation for NABU, and also assign written instructions to both agencies. In other words, the prosecutor general is effectively given control of these two institutions. You know, not completely, but a significant amount of control. And that happened. That coincided. So this law was passed, and I want to say it was passed like completely legally and above board. It was passed by a vast majority of the Ukrainian parliament. I want to say 200 something MPs voted for, maybe like 14 against, and like 20 abstentions, something around those numbers. So, you know, it was totally legally passed by the parliament, arguably overwhelmingly. And this coincided with another sort of high-level arrest by the SBU, or two arrests. So around the same time, the SBU arrested two detectives from NABU, the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, on alleged charges of espionage and illegal business dealings connected with Russia. The first officer, Viktor Gusarov, worked in the Internal Affairs Unit, and he was accused of passing sensitive information, including personal data, to Dmitry Ivansov, who was a former Ukrainian security official who is believed to have contacts with the FSB. And a second officer, Magema Druslov, who is the lead regional detective in a certain region of NABU's jurisdiction, which covered Dnipro and Zaporizhia. And he's accused of facilitating his father's undeclared business operations that exported things to Russia, and of having undisclosed ties to a former Ukrainian MP, Fedor Krishenko, who's alleged to have had connections to Russian intelligence, and so FSB contacts, basically. So basically, around the same time this law was passed, there were these two high-profile arrests made. And then I think the final piece of information I would add is that it's rumored. I don't know if there's any publicly declared information about this, but it's rumored that NABU was investigating Timur Mindich, which is a close associate of President Zelensky, and that they were investigating him for corruption in military procurement contracts. And the investigation was at an advanced stage around the time that these arrests were made. And some people kind of allege that there might be a connection between this investigation specifically and the recent kind of moves against NABU and SAPO. And of course, the presidential administration and like the people who passed the law and so forth, they basically, if you ask them like, why was this law passed, they say that there's a lot of FSB influence in NABU and SAPO, and that was the reason they needed to take more control of it to kind of protect from that influence. And there was a big public reaction. And Mr. Bianati, I'll turn it over to you. Go ahead.
And just one point I wanted to add, like, was the day before there was like a raid on the NABU office, basically from the SBU, and it was like about 15 traffic violation cases. So, which I was also told was possibly like politically timed and played a bit of a role in this. But yeah, like up to this point, and then basically more or less we had this reaction from the Ukrainian society, right, with the protest starting.
Yeah, and I think too, I would even connect it. I would start with the EU, right? So
yeah, okay. Let's go to the EU and to like basically the ground layout, because like we already had some questions about this, and basically questions about like NABU and SAPO and Russian connections and so on. Let's have a look at the basis why NABU and SAPO are like so important. And this was always like in the beginning when Ukraine wanted to join the European Union, right? There's like an opinion from the European Commission from 2020, the 7 preconditions. And the first precondition is basically appointing leaders to the Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, SAPO, and the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, NABU. We will also hear from the third institution, which is the High Anti-Corruption Court of Ukraine, the HACC. We will use this abbreviation because it's easier, I think. And yeah, basically, second reform was a judicial reform for the High Council of Justice and the High Qualification Commission of judges through transparent and integrity-based procedures. Third reform, which they needed to hit, was a constitutional court selection process. Then they had to launch an effective investigation in prosecution into grand corruption cases, start an institute for anti-money laundering measures aligned with the FATF standards, tackle oligarchic influence, including limits on lobbying and assets transparency, and 7, protect minority rights, strengthen democratic institutions, and rule of law. As we can see, like all these points have like this line going through basically that it's mainly about anti-corruption, what Ukraine has to do. We have a rule of law report from 2024. There it basically points out in point 5 that the prosecution is a key element in the capacity of a member state to fight crime and corruption, and about the principles and so on. And he has also mentioned that these should be free of political interference, these corruption investigations, and so these the judiciary should be like free from political influence. And this is what you mentioned before, right? That we have this problem in Ukraine, that the political party is choosing like the people who are sitting on this court, which have now, or which are the prosecutors, which are now basically have an oversight over NABU and SAPO, which is against this idea, which we want to have in anti-corruption from the European Union. This is not a thing we have like since 24 or something. From the report of the implementation, the EU association agreement with Ukraine in 2020, basically the first thing when the European Union associated it with Ukraine, and Ukraine coming into the European Union, point 39 points out the importance of ensuring independence of the High Court of Anti-Corruption and other anti-corruption institutions, speaking of NABU and SAPO, and it calls for an unbiased and partial approach to be taken in the activities of the anti-corruption institutions in order to secure trust and public support in the fight against corruption. Basically, this are the base factors which lay out why we have this, and this is implemented even before 2020 too, and even before 2020 when Zelensky himself was going into his election that he wanted to join the European Union was a big point there. And these are basically mechanisms which were forced on Ukraine, and not only by the European Union, but also by some US, could I say, assistance NGOs and other stuff, which are basically helping them. I think USAID was also relatively active in the anti-corruption.
So, like in summary, a bunch of international institutions, particularly the EU, have said, you got to keep your anti-corruption unit independent, and basically every European ambassador that was approached and asked about this law that was passed said that this is bad. This kind of goes against that principle of independent anti-corruption investigation, and that this might, jeopardize Ukraine's EU accession process. No one's outright said they won't be allowed in the EU, but that this definitely will impact the process. And I think that in part explains a lot of why the Ukrainian public is so active about this issue, is that it's directly tied with their status in the EU. So that's why I wanted to start with the EU reaction.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, absolutely. And this is the other part, right? Like we can speak from my side and from your side about the EU and about the legislature and what points they want to have, and also about the Ukraine facility plan and what kind of consequences it already has. But the Ukrainian society is a completely different point. They are basically forced since 2014, which is like basically the thing where they really align with the European Union on these issues, and which I'm personally always say like Ukraine has so much similarities, and the issue Ukraine actually has right now, and in the eyes of the European Union, many other countries, the anti-corruption, this is an issue which especially the Ukrainian news is really like interested in, and the Ukrainian society. So you see some protesting there. It's great to see.
Yeah, and I guess it's like a final, like what actually happened before we kind of get more into our editorial opinion on what's going on. The president has responded to the protests and the reactions from the EU by basically saying we're going to get a new law in place that will ensure the independent. Like basically, we're going to roll back what we just did, where we're going to have an independent anti-corruption unit. And the new law will basically address the issues that we were everyone's concerned about. And he basically said it'll take about 2 weeks, so maybe another week or so, week and a half, to have all that finalized and kind of put through. So that's where we're at. We don't know exactly what's going to happen with that new bill. I think the text of the new bill exists and is being reviewed right now. But it's not totally clear that bill will pass in the current form it's in, and so forth. We're going to have to wait a little bit to find out the final resolution of this. Right, Bionati, do we want to cover anything else about like just the facts of what happened?
From this side, maybe quickly we can have a look at the where did I put it? The Ukraine facility plan, because it's also implemented there. This is excuse me. Yeah, this is basically the plan
Yeah, the Ukraine Peace
from
Facility plan is like something I mentioned in my earlier news report. This is a program the EU created where, as Ukraine meets targets for like making progress on their EU accession reforms, they get like financial payments for that. So go ahead, Bina.
Yeah. All right. I could share my screen, I guess, for a second, and then we will just have a quick look into this. Not go too far into the data, but basically chapter 4 of the Ukraine Facility Plan 2024 to 2027 points out fight against corruption and anti-money laundering. It's all about this. Who wants to read this, we will provide a link later, but as you can see, it's quite extensive. There are different different reforms which need to be implemented. Ukraine needs to hit different goals, and this is basically what happened this week also, which is kind of related to this. That Ukraine basically has these kind of reforms under some pillars they have to pursue, and also all stuff from 2023 to 2025. Here is it. Corruption program, develop national agency corruption. Yeah, this is basically what is already adopted and implemented, which they changed now, which is really bad. This is always like a thing with the criticism on Nabu and Zapo. If you're like think like there are Russian spies in it and so on, like there are mechanisms to like get new personnel in there. This is not the thing, right? Like if you have like evidence that Nabu and Zapo is full of Russian spies and they're like super ineffective, then you can just at some point exchange some personnel there and like get rid of them or take legal actions against them. But placing them under the oversight is basically against all this framework you were aligned to, you applied to, and this already had the consequences that especially I'll stop sharing now here. That especially is with the fourth tranche of Ukraine's money they should receive under the Ukraine Facility Plan for this year. They should receive, or were expected to receive, 4.5 billion euros from the European Commission. The European Commission proposed now to disperse 3.05 billion because they did not meet all the reform commitments, and only 13 out of 16 were hit. So 3 are still outstanding. One is a reform in decentralization. Another point they had to achieve was appointing the High Anti-Corruption Court, which we mentioned, which is basically the third organization with Nabu and Zapu, which is still independent right now. But yeah, if you basically have someone telling you to not investigate, then the investigative units like Nabu and Zapu, which are tasked to investigate, cannot investigate, and then your court can be independent as it wants. But basically you disabled it. And the last law is a law about reforming asset recovery and management agencies. So as we can see, anti-corruption again here, a big part. They're getting now more than 1 billion less, 1.4 billion something euros less paid out. And this is really consequences because the EU in 2020, I think, let me just have a look. Yeah, in 2020, basically they revised the enlargement methodology and basically said we give clear incentives, right? We support and accelerate economic development and give tangible benefits for citizens and so on. But they have also now more decisive measurements. I'm sorry, and with prolonged stagnation or even backsliding, slowing down negotiations, they just like start to adjust and withdraw funding, and as you can see, 1.4 billion. It's already like quite of hurtful. There is still like a possibility, let's say, in the next 12 months, complete these reforms and then get basically a top up and get the rest of the money paid out. But there are real consequences to these kind of actions from the European Union and from the facility plan and other frameworks they work under and get their funding under. So they have to do it or make some really hurtful decisions, which the Ukrainian society will possibly not be very happy with.
Yeah.
I
So
think
okay.
that's it
Okay.
from
Sorry.
the data side.
I jumped the gun there. So yeah, I think like that's what happened, right? And now we'll from here we'll talk a little bit. This is more our opinion on it, or like we're just taking the facts at this point and like interpreting them to a certain degree based on the context. I think it kind of there's like two main questions that rise from this. Number one is like just the political viability of it, or whatever you want to call it, and then number two is the like the question of basically the president's argument is that Nabu and Sapo are like influenced by the Russia and the FSB, and like is there evidence of that? So let's talk about both those things. The first thing is, I think it's clear to everyone who observed the event. Like, I haven't seen a lot of narratives against what happened where what I'm saying is, it seems like this was a poorly executed move by the president and like his supporters. It like, regardless of how you feel about the law itself, it seems like the way that it was done, the way they went about implementing this, was highly irregular for Ukrainian parliament and the Ukrainian public who watched it happen. It was something that they didn't have enough time, the lawmakers, to like meaningfully review. And in Ukrainian society, there's a lot of grumbling about, there have been a lot of laws that have been stuck in parliament for months and months about really critical issues. And to see this law just shoot through with like no interference, I think was pretty jarring to Ukrainians. So it was viewed as highly irregular. And
especially the point that the law wasn't really like about it itself, right? Like it was just like an amendment to this law, right? Like I see this like in some kind of political I don't know streaming series from the US where it's like about political topics, right? Like we have this kind of amendment we have to put in, and then we like go in through the back door, whatever, right? But like this sounds like a bit irregular, and raised especially like some eyebrows with people, because the original law was about people who could not be located, or like were missing in occupied territories, or what was it about?
Yeah, something like that. It was like they wanted to streamline the missing person stuff, and then this just got attached to that. So I think there was a lot of like basically the president's office came at this really hard. They really went all out. And then they did these high level SBU arrests. I mean, I don't have any evidence, but it seems pretty clear that they were coordinated to happen at the same time, so that this was all kind of, it would all just hit the public at once like this. And I think that seems to have backfired, right? It seems like the public didn't accept this, and that the government, the president should have, if his true intention was to pass this no matter what, he should have made an effort to communicate this better and probably take the process more slowly and like democratically if he really wanted to get this done. But instead, he kind of just tried to push it through quickly, and the reaction was very negative. So I think that politically it was like a mistake in execution, number one. Then we get to the question of like, why do this, right? Again, we'll talk a little bit more about whether or not the FSB is involved, but I think that really the question is, did the benefits of having Ukraine, the party or the leadership of Ukraine, have direct oversight of the anti-corruption body? Is it really worth risking the EU stuff, right? That's the question for me. And I would say
Yeah.
no. And so, like, why is it such a risk for Ukraine, right? If you ask my personal opinion, this law itself, it wouldn't be the end of democracy in Ukraine, right? In my opinion. But the issue is that Ukraine has a very special status right now, partly because of the full-scale invasion. They have, but also because of their own very significant accomplishments in reforming their government to align with the EU. They've been on an accelerated path to EU membership, and they basically sped ahead of a lot of countries that have been waiting a long time to get into the EU. And this whole thing has I don't think it's like precluded them from being in the EU or like created a dictatorship in Ukraine, but they were in a very delicate, precarious position where they were being accelerated on this program of getting into the EU, and this has really thrown a wrench into that. And that's, I think, one reason that why Ukrainians are so upset. And so, again, like, this is my personal opinion, but my political analysis was it was poorly executed, and I don't see a return on investment here that's really worth all the trouble, personally.
I mean, this is a question. This is a question, Joseph, right? Like where you can like make the argument in multiple directions. But like, if you would be like a politician and like you're a cool guy, you're an honest guy, I think personally. So, would you be feared by an investigation of like an independent organization who's like looking into corruption? You maybe did. Yeah, I mean, sure, like it's a federal agency or like they have some powers and they've always been not so good. But this was the other argument, right? Like where I heard like they made so less arrests and so on. Yeah, because they're an investigative body. Like their work was investigative bodies. They're not like executive body on the police side, right? Sure, they like have some ways to do some stuff, but like was about like anti-corruption, much paperwork and other stuff, and not about going out and making many arrests, right? So the question is here. Yeah, sure, you wouldn't be happy if the IRS or someone would like investigate you, but like if you wouldn't be like in some kind of businesses or somewhere where you say like I have something to hide, you wouldn't be so worried. Even if they are like even if like the boss of all of them would be like an FSB guy, right? Like or something like this. Like they would have make you commit crimes or like make up evidence, or I don't know what. But like from my perspective, from my personal perspective, it's for me like why would you be feared, and like why would this be like a big target for Russia? I didn't really got the argumentation chain there, where they like could influence Nabu and Sapo so much, and then basically have the other third independent court, the High Anti-Corruption Court, which are all like organizations which are highly oversight not only by the European Union but like by other stuff like the G7 and other organizations there in, right, which are like into the anti-corruption internationally. Why? Yeah, it doesn't really make so much sense for me how this would work out.
Yeah, so like I would say like I've tried to separate like the law itself from the like political execution of it, and
Yeah.
that's just my general opinion. Like they stirred up a pot here by doing this, and I don't see the payoff. I don't think the payoff was worth it personally. Obviously, I think that they could have probably gotten the same result if they had gone about it in a different way, but so I think now we can move to the actual question, which I think is like a totally fair question, which is the president and his supporters have basically said the reason we created this law is because we see a lot of FSB influence in Nabu and Sapo, and that basically like we can't tolerate that, and so we needed to take more control of the organization in order to clean it up. And so that's the ostensible reason that they gave for why this happened. So the question becomes, is there publicly available information that Nabu and Sapo are like influenced directly by the FSB and so forth? I think, I'll try to get into the specifics of why I think this way, but my general answer, if you ask me for a very simple answer, would be no. I don't see any direct public information that the FSB has any like significant direct influence over these two institutions. And I'll kind of talk about the three main incidents that are discussed. So I already mentioned that there are these two high-level arrests. Those are the two main incidents. One of them involved like a college buddy, basically one of the investigators in Nabu had a college buddy who had a direct FSB handler, in my understanding, and he was passing documents. Like basically they arrested that guy and they found Nabu documents on him, right? So it's pretty clear that there were leaks going out directly to the FSB. Like I don't think there's any denying that. And something similar happened with the other detective that they arrested. And one of those detectives was like a regional guy. I think he would have had some influence in hiring decisions. So implied there is that, I'll put it this way. The only actual evidence is that stuff was leaking out of Nabu towards the FSB. And if you want my general opinion, stuff leaks out of Ukraine all the time. That's just the way this war is. Stuff leaks out of Russia all the time. These two countries have had ongoing intelligence operations. Some of them have been cooking for decades. Like that's just how this war is going. Like things leak. That's just how it is. So if you're holding Nabu and Sapo to the standard of like every other Ukrainian institution, I don't think it's especially like leaking in any way. I will say that it seems legitimate that the SBU has been trying to go after these guys and go after Nabu and Sapo a little bit, certain personnel within them. And they've been like trying to tell them to clean up house. And it doesn't seem like they've kind of moved quickly on it, something like that. But, I don't think that there's no public evidence that there are any like FSB agents in Nabu and Sapo. It was all like guys who talked to guys who had FSB handlers, something like that. Things were leaking out. There's also been some talk from certain Ukrainians, something to the effect of like, not everything has been made public, right? There might be other things. And I do want to stress, like, it seems implied that there would be more, right? If you have a high-level detective that's like willing to leak documents to a guy who is very clearly aligned with like pro-Russian factions in the FSB, like that's definitely like a problem. And it does imply maybe he had some influence over things, that he was helping the FSB do things. But that said, that no one has alleged that publicly. And if the Ukrainian government is currently sitting on any information based on the scale of the backlash, I personally would let it out if they can, because I think it was like poorly communicated. I don't think Ukrainians see the connection between FSB influence and why this needed to happen this way. So the only other thing I wanted to point to is there are two other incidents that are mentioned by some people when they were talking about this. One is that there were allegedly two Nabu agents who helped escort a certain oligarch who was under investigation for corruption. Basically, the allegation, as far as I understand it, is he got to the border and he shouldn't have been allowed to leave the country. And two Nabu guys like flashed their badges and were like, "You got to let him through. Like he's part of an investigation or whatever." And the border service was like, "Okay," and they like let him through. And as far like, I did my best to research this because like I don't have any personal skin in the game, right? I don't really care. Like generally speaking, I don't really care much about how the Ukrainians handle their domestic politics. That's what this is all about. They should be able to decide their own fate. It's not up to me. But I don't have a lot of skin in the game. I tried to research really like, is there any FSB influence, etc. My general understanding is that two Nabu guys flashed their badges and like snuck a guy through a border crossing, but they don't have any real authority. It's not that they had authority that they abused. If I understood correctly, they tricked a couple of rubes at the border by flashing their badges. And that's really the State Borders Guard Service of Ukraine has the authority to let people in or out. So they shouldn't have let that guy out. I don't think that implies that like Nabu is especially compromised. Basically just, the State Border Service should make sure that they shouldn't just accept people flashing badges at them. They're the final authority on who leaves the country.
Yeah,
not
yeah,
Nabu.
yeah.
And then the only other incident, go ahead. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like your point was that like it's It's a bit of weird coincidence, like two pairs of eyes looking there, the other pairs of eyes looking there, like yeah.
Yeah,
And,
I couldn't find a lot of direct facts about it, but that's my general inference of what they're saying.
Yeah.
That like there was an
Yeah.
oligarch that was trying to leave the country, and Nabu they allege that Nabu assisted him leaving the country. Two agents in Nabu assisted him leaving the country, and that's my best explanation for what they mean by that. And then the only other incident that's mentioned is that there was a certain high-level guy that he escaped to France, basically. Ukraine wanted to extradite him from France. And so France, which is a totally normal procedure, said, okay, give us your paperwork to extradite this guy. And, the paperwork would consist of all the reasons you want to extradite him and this and that. And my general understanding, again, I'm not an expert on all these matters, but my general understanding is NABU did their job. They investigated this guy. They presented all their evidence. SAPO did their job. They brought all that prosecutorial evidence to the Ukrainian courts, I assume the anti-corruption court, and the court itself was too slow, and things got stuck in the mail and all that. And basically the French waited for the paperwork for a while. And generally speaking, when countries extradite to other countries, they want to make sure that that person gets a fair trial. It's something like, he is probably some kind of citizen of France or whatever. And, France doesn't want just to hand over people to countries and then not know that they're going to get a fair trial. So basically the Ukrainians didn't have all their paperwork in order when they asked. And so France waited for a while. And then eventually they were like, listen, you're not giving us this paperwork in a timely manner. We're just not comfortable with what you're offering here. So we're not going to agree to extradite this guy. So again, I'm not an expert, but my general understanding is in this situation, NABU and SAPO did their job. The problem is the courts. And if you ask Ukrainians on the street, this is my general from interacting with Ukrainians, that's where the problem with a lot of this stuff is. It's not that NABU and SAPO are compromised in some way or that they're not doing their job. They seem to be doing their job. The issue is the courts themselves, the court system in Ukraine. That's the one area where serious reform is still needed, and they need more resources. There's huge backlogs of cases, and it's not that the judges are immediately ruling in your favor if you pay them or something, but it's your case can easily get stuck in line versus a case that can get expedited very quickly based on all that. So that's, to me, that's the issue, is that if your real intention was to fix some of the corruption issues going on and the compromise of what's going on, that's probably where you would want to look. You'd want to strengthen the power of you'd want to put more oversight, independent oversight of the judiciary, and you'd want to give them more resources to streamline their court system.
Yeah, that's where we go for full circle, Joseph, back to the sanctions they just got and the milestone they just did not hit, which is the second milestone, the judicial appointments to the High Anti-Corruption Court, which should have been done and haven't been completed. So that's what you're basically talking about. These institutions aren't fully staffed yet haven't have all the reforms implemented. There's still stuff missing, and it's not working on full force. And then complaining about stuff like, it costs so much money and was so much money invested, but they don't have done so much. Yeah, because they couldn't. If you have your both arms bind behind your back, and how you gonna fight, right? That's the issue here. It's still in the implementary phase, and there are things from the Rada which should be implemented, where they have clear help and support and directions about how this should work, and get the incentives for this, right? This is all pointed out in this Ukraine facility plan and in other agreements they have signed with the European Union and with other states. Especially also, this is another big topic, right? This is also about the funding for rebuilding Ukraine, for other programs. That these programs were only implemented because you have these kind of judicial reforms, you have this anti-corruption court, you have NABU and SAPO, and you have other organizations which are independent and are politically influenced. So yeah, all this and many other stuff where it's like basically going on about money is about this and about transparency. And this is the other big point, right? NABU, SAPO, and the High Anti-Corruption Court is mostly about transparency, and they are transparent organizations. And I don't, yeah, if you want to read stuff about this, you can just basically go on the EU website or put it into Google or ChatGPT or wherever you want, and they will give you all the data, all the plans, all the written stuff, because it's really transparent, the European Union. So it's mainly about transparency, and possibly this is also a point why this is sometimes stopped and slowly implemented, and leads to this kind of issues. And even in this case, a law which is basically a really big step back from stuff they already achieved, from reforms they already achieved in this direction, right? And as you said, Joseph, I don't know a single person I spoke with Ukrainian person who was like for this law. Everyone was like really like disappointed, and for them it was part of 2014 that they want this anti-corruption, and yeah, whatever the motivation was, the way it was implemented and taking away the independence of NABU and SAPO, that wasn't the way which is good for the people, good with yeah, the agreements signed, and yeah, we will see how quickly they find back to the proper way doing this.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, the president and his supporters didn't outline specifically what they meant by FSB influence in NABU and SAPO, but I did my best to like look up what the Ukrainian press is talking about and like what major incidents might they be referring to. I mentioned 4 incidents here. You know, as Bionade said, we highly recommend you guys go do your own research on this. We're not experts on Ukrainian politics. We just try to cover the war, but this has pretty significant implications for the war, as Bionade already mentioned. You know, 1.5 billion euros is on the line just as a starter. Ukraine's EU accession process, which is pretty much necessary for their economy to recover from the war and also to be like a security deterrent from Russia in the future. EU membership is like the ticket, right? I mean, that's, if you look at Poland, right, their GDP per capita since they joined the EU has just gone up and up and up, and they're now able to afford like a pretty big military. So that's why, you know, we have to cover this, is that it's it had a pretty significant impact on Ukraine's own domestic politics, the stability of the country, and it also has a very direct bearing on Ukraine's EU accession. But yeah, I did my best to outline like the 4 main incidents that I'm aware of in terms of like alleged FSB influence. And in my humble opinion, I don't see how making the prosecutor general like in charge of the whole kit and caboodle like solves any of those problems. It looks to me like there are other ways you could go about solving this problem without jeopardizing your EU funding and upsetting the public. And yeah, I don't know. I hope that Zelensky and his staff like reconsider how they're going about this. And I hope that this new bill is able to like reestablish trust between the parliament and the president and the population. Because yeah, obviously like that stability and that trust has been really critical in allowing Ukraine to continue like resisting Russian aggression as like strongly as they have. So yeah, I think we really hope it all obviously like kind of works itself out. But in general, it was a poorly executed move, and for questionable reasons. And we really, I'm personally glad to see the president to a certain extent like backtracking on some of the like more aggressive measures against NABU and SAPO. Bionade, you want to say anything else closing out here?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to agree with you again about the leaks. That this is stuff which, yeah, we expect to happen and what happens. But I really don't see how Russia could have an influence on these really transparent organizations to basically have a impact on them that they can do something really bad and like change something. Like it's literally transparent anti-corruption.
I'm sure they're
units.
trying to find out who Ukraine's investigating, because some of those guys are probably, to some extent, like, have I'm sure there's some FSB influence that, or like Russia's going to try to get influence wherever it can, right? And like especially on an anti-corruption body in any country. But yeah, like the solution here, and if you ask Ukrainians, the solution was for the SBU to arrest these guys, right? I mean, you go after the people. You don't have to change the whole leadership structure of everything in order to fix this
Absolutely.
problem.
You go after the take off the foul apples and don't cut down the tree, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think that's our general take on it. Obviously, Chad, you're totally entitled to your opinion. If you feel that we missed any evidence or anything like that, or you have an opinion about it, you're welcome to share it. Like I said, we're not experts in Ukrainian politics, but we did our best to kind of research and provide a sort of a big, broad overview that I think a lot of the Western media missed. As someone in chat mentioned, some people in the Western media claim that the protests were like anti-war. I don't think anything could be further from the truth. There's basically no element of this that has anything to do with wanting like I shouldn't say that Ukrainians don't want peace. They do, but like this isn't about ending the war. The protests were about this law being passed, and they wanted the president to veto the bad law. That was what the protests were about. It had nothing to do with like whether the war should continue or not, so forth. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Mr. Gao, I had one other thing I want to talk to you about. It's actually a question in chat. So why don't we just transition to Q&A now? And someone in chat asked you to clarify the number of batteries, Patriot batteries, that will be going to Ukraine. I believe it's now 5, if I read all the media reports accurately, Mr. Gao. Is that correct?
No, it's not. First of all, let me just bring up the question. So there is an agreement, or let's say they're currently trying to get up to 5 Patriot fire units to Ukraine. They've identified the needs. Ukraine said we need 5. So that's what they're trying to get. But there's no agreement to actually provide 3 because they need to source them somewhere. The Germans try to, as well as Norway and some other countries, said, we're giving you money, USA, give us Patriot fire units from your stocks because you have, I don't know, like 60 plus, right? More than whole of Europe combined. And they said, no, that's the reason why they have now to source these Patriot fire units within Europe or maybe somewhere else. And so it's completely up to which countries are willing to give up that many fire units from their own stocks. So there's no agreement of 5 fire units, and a timeline is really difficult to say. There was currently a report by The Telegraph, which is, in my opinion, the only report which actually stated that one of these fire units already arrived in Ukraine thanks to an agreement with Germany. I have no intel in that. Just want to say Colby also talked about that, and he said they might referring to the fire unit which was announced to bought back from Israel, which have been in refurbishment in the US for months now. That could be the case. I'm not sure whether that would have to do anything with Germany, to be honest. The German Minister of Defense just a couple of days ago said on a press conference that he's very confused by all these media reports. First of all, saying that there would be 5 Patriots for Ukraine thanks to Germany, or that German fire units are already on the way. They're still in, at least officially, still in negotiations about all these details. Like I said, the Germans have a different understanding of the situation as the Americans. All kinds of money is involved from very different countries. All of this has to be coordinated. And so it might take days, it might take weeks. Pistorius just days ago said, it could take months. We really don't know, and especially speaking of maybe 1 or 2 fire units, that could go quickly when we're actually talking about 5 and we can actually achieve bringing 5 new fire units to Ukraine. That could combined take many, many months, maybe more than a year. Because I think other countries have the same issues as Germany, right? The German Minister of Defense said that they are only willing to part with more of their own fire units when it wouldn't take longer than, let's say, 6 to 8 months to actually replace them. The big problem is replacements are either coming from other countries, which are itself not willing to give them up, so that's not an option. And if they are willing to give them up, they're going to Ukraine, not to Germany. So this leaves us with the option of producing newly fire units. And there we have the topic with Switzerland. I'm sorry, I'm giving a very, very detailed answer right now. I don't think that anyone want to hear that. But now I'm just going to finish. And that's the issue with Switzerland, because Colby and John actually reminded me that certain components of the Swiss-produced fire units were to be produced in Switzerland itself. When they are not doing that anymore, these parts have to be additionally produced in the US, which takes more time. And for all we know, it should be, including the production in Switzerland, should take 6 to 8 months for the delivery to Switzerland. So if we now let's just say 3-4 months because of the additional production in the US onto that, then we are already at it takes more than a year to produce the next fire unit or in a replacement fire unit. And according to the statement of Pistorius, then Germany would not be willing to hand over any fire units. So I don't think it will actually lead that way, but currently, at least when as far as official statements are concerned, it could actually be the case that no additional fire units are going to Ukraine. Because we shouldn't forget that Germany and the Netherlands, both countries independently, tried to bring new fire units from European stocks to Ukraine last year. Germany failed with that. We were the only ones to send a new one with months delay than also the US. The Netherlands tried to assemble a fire unit from other countries, and countries like Poland, Sweden, and etc., they didn't even want to part with components, right? So I don't think they're right now willing to give away a full fire unit, which is a system, right? So yeah, we have to see. Time will tell. I would just say, don't get your hopes too high up that we can actually provide 5 total. I think that's more than unlikely, but maybe 1 or 2 that could be the case. Yeah, we have financial commitments. At least this is true. We have financial commitments for 3 full fire units. We have Germany, who said we have a financial commitment to finance 2. We have Norway, which has a financial commitment to finance 1, and then I think we have also Lithuania yesterday or 2 days ago, who said we're willing to provide up to 30 million euros, which is of course not much. I mean, you can finance like I don't know, 5 interceptors with that, but it's still a commitment. And I believe Sweden or some other countries were also not, involved, saying, yeah, we would be willing to finance without giving any numbers now. But the problem is not the money. The problem is the equipment itself. And other countries would need to be willing to give up their own stuff. And that's the problem right now. Sorry for the long rant.
No, it's good. I think it's good information. There was a lot of mainstream media reports that like Germany will send 5 batteries to Ukraine. And it's just like, I think a lot of people don't understand what, like, Germany now has 1 battery defending itself, right? Is that right?
No, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. We have currently stationed 2 in Poland, and I just want to mention these fire units in Poland. They were announced for a 6-month deployment in, I believe, starting in January. So they should be either coming back to Germany, which is very good, because then we would have 2 more freely at our capacity, or maybe they're expanding their deployment in Poland. That could also be the case. We don't know that yet. But we have 2 in Poland right now, at least officially. Maybe they're already back. I'm not sure. I don't know, at least. We have, I believe, 4 or 5 in like modernization in the industry. I'm not sure about the exact quantities. There was a media report saying something. I believe for our own defense from the 12, including the training system we had before the war, we currently for our own defense have, I believe, 3, at max 4.
Right. Yeah. So any journalist who just uncritically publishes like Germany will send 5 to another country.
Yeah, that's bullshit.
It's you should probably look at that and go, I don't know. That seems kind of outlandish. So yeah, wanted to go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. The thing is, I really don't understand like why these media reports happen, because this is based on on the statement of Pistorius, of our defense minister, at the latest UDCG meeting. Yeah, and that's why I was so confused about that, because I listened to that statement. I had like access to the Zoom meeting, as many other journalists had, right? And in this Zoom meeting, in the opening remarks, Pistorius said Germany will contribute to procuring five fire units. I don't understand how contributing to means Germany is financing 5 or sending 5. And I mean, I'm not a native German, not a native English speaker, but in my opinion, that means that we are, contributing to a part of, or we are financing a part of these 5. Yeah, and everyone or nearly everyone made of this contributing to made Germany is going to provide 5. There was like not a single statement of him saying that Germany is actually sending 5. And just a couple of days later, he also said publicly in a press statement that he's very, very confused by these media reports, because he said nothing alike. And yeah, always check your sources, guys.
Yeah, I think it's just like a bad game of telephone where basically you're looking at the actual meeting, the primary source. And so for you, it's pretty obvious. But for a journalist who just goes on Twitter and is like, what's everyone else saying? Oh, they're saying, someone interpreted it as charitably as possible, which is contributing to equals, we're going to send 5. Then a bunch of people tweet about it. Then a bunch of journalists read those tweets and then they just kind of run with it. I think that, that's usually what happens in these scenarios where either a Ukrainian or a German official statement gets mistranslated once, to use a charitable term, mistranslated, and then, it just kind of makes the rounds. And then because other people are saying it, other people say it, and it's just a big rumor mill. So we do our best to try to, let you guys know when we see like bad information like this. It's just, as Germany to Ukraine said, it's just not accurate. And on the face of it, should give you pause to hear that Germany is sending 5 Patriot systems to Ukraine, because that's like a lot. So yeah, I think that's it for that question. Got a few more questions. Someone asks, what will it take for Siersky and Yermak to finally get fired for incompetence? Ooh, spicy question. Chat's feeling spicy today, Mr. Gao. It's a tough question. There's a lot of controversy when Siersky was put in charge of the Ukrainian military. I would say for understandable reasons. Zaluzhny, I don't personally, I couldn't rate his military performance. I'm not a military, person, but I do know that he, in terms of presidential polling, if there is Zelensky and there is Zaluzhny, like, in other words, he is the only real political rival that Zelensky has in Ukraine. So it's a bit, I don't know, it was a bit suspicious at the time and controversial when he was removed and, to put it uncharitably, exiled to England. That all looked a bit funky. That said, I would say that since Siersky has been in charge, I haven't heard a lot of grumbling about him, like in the day-to-day. It doesn't look like there have been any significant, like, there haven't been any major bunglings or disasters since he's been put in charge that I'm aware of. Again, I'm not really the person to ask about those things, but I do read the mainstream media reports. I spare you guys the frontline details because as of now they're very minor. But it should be noted Russia is still advancing very, very slowly, but they are, especially in certain key areas where it could be bad that they're advancing. And that the Ukrainians are doing their best to resist it, but I don't see any special incompetence coming out of Siersky that I'm aware of in any of those reports. As for Yermak, I mentioned. Oh, go ahead, Gad. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, no, I just want to add, as far as I know, if I recall correctly, it was said like a couple of days ago that Russia is like at very, very high manpower losses and equipment losses. It's advancing like 200 meters like a day or something like this. And this is really like, I mean, it's advancing, of course, but this is really like nothing. 200 meters is, especially for Ukraine, which is like so few people in comparison to the landmass. It's like, yeah, it's really nothing.
Yeah, I would say, again, I do want to stress Russia is still advancing, but it's not on a level like a year ago. People would have had much less optimistic predictions about how far Russia would have advanced. So, all that seems to imply that Syrski's leadership is not directly incompetent. He might not be the most brilliant strategist in the world. I don't know, but doesn't look like he's totally, beansing it. So that's Syrsky. My hot take on Syrsky. My hot take on Yermak. I mentioned it like a couple weeks ago. I would say my personal opinion is that Zelensky should probably get rid of Yermak. It seems like he's very unpopular with the Ukrainian public. When I do hear Ukrainian opinions about Yermak, they're negative. I mentioned before that in like foreign governments, he's not looked on super favorably. And the reason that's given off the record when people ask, like, why do you guys not like Yermak, is basically that he comes to these capitals and he makes like a big show of it. But then when they ask him, like, what are you here for? What do you want? He doesn't always have an answer that's very clear. And so it doesn't look like he's very good at like influencing foreign governments. He's not very popular at home. He has a reputation for taking a hard line against Zelensky's political opponents. I would argue that like Zelensky has, I would say personally views his role as like a protector of like Ukraine itself. And I think he sees Yermak as like the guy who's advising him on like how to protect his own personal kind of party interests. And I think that Ukrainians, when you ask them like why they dislike Yermak, that's the reason they would give, is that he goes too hard after like political opponents. And that's just the general impression. So my personal opinion is that Yermak it would probably be to Zelensky and Ukraine's benefit at this point to cut this guy loose and have someone a little less controversial and a little more well-liked in that position. And that would give Zelensky, I think, a little bit more leeway to do certain things like what he just tried to do. But that's just my opinion. I'm sure the president has the president is welcome to choose his own advisors, and I'm sure he's got his reasons. So, I'm not someone who says that Yermak has to go or, Ukraine is going to lose or something. And I certainly am not someone who thinks like Zelensky needs to be replaced personally. I think and I would say that's not something Ukrainians think either. It seems like all Ukrainians pretty much recognize that like while the war is going on, there's not going to be an election and that Zelensky is the rightful president of Ukraine. No one in the protest is kind of like arguing against that. So, that's just my general take. I don't think Syrsky probably should get fired for incompetence. I probably think Yermak should, but he probably won't be. And, it's not the end of the world. Anyone else have anything you want to say about this?
No.
Cool. Next question. Any ideas where Ukrainians will get money for new troops or pay increases for frontline troops or weapon industries? So again, another spicy topic. Thanks for being spicy today, Chad. I like your spicy questions. This is not something I personally am like an authority on, but I've asked a few Ukrainians about this, and I think the general vibe in Ukraine is that right now the death benefits for soldiers who are lost is very high, and there are like a lot of these like payments that are made in that area, social payments and things like that. And I would say more hardline Ukrainians think that those things need to be cut and money needs to be put more directly into buying weapons. And I would say probably they don't want a pay increase for troops. They want more money for weapons and expanding the military. And they want those benefits cut. And if you ask them like what their opinion on those benefits are, they would say something to the effect of Zelensky has those benefits in place to like solidify his own support, and that money should be going towards weapons for Ukraine. I think the more like charitable interpretation is that it's good for the stability of the country and it's good for the economy of the country to have like good death benefits for soldiers. I think, there's a reasonable argument to be made that that's the case. That said, it's understandable. These are limited resources. It's going to be a controversial decision either way, whichever one you choose. If you ask me personally, I would say you probably want to spend money on weapons now and you can give death benefits later. But that's just my personal take. I think it's been the case too, like, there have been a lot of protests in Ukraine with local governments where, Ukrainians are kind of famous for having, for cleaning up their streets, basically, right? Like you have these pictures of like Russia will blow up a street, like one day they'll just hit a civilian target and the street will be a mess. And 5 days later, the street just looks good as new. And I think a lot of Ukrainians are like, hey, we can deal with some potholes in our roads, go buy more weapons for the army, right? And so there have been protests in Ukraine about stuff like that, where they feel like the money's being spent frivolously on like little things like that, and it should be going to the troops. So I would say there is room in Ukraine for some of this money to be going more towards the troops. But, the general picture is that I would say the bottom line is that money, that financing is mostly going to have to come from outside. Ukraine needs to settle. There's this outstanding debt issue right now, where there's a bunch of creditors that Ukraine has, and they've defaulted on some debt, and they need to reach some kind of agreement with those debtors. That would really improve their prospects in the near future for more credit. And then the other issue, of course, is that they are getting certain direct government funding, like the Ukraine Facility Fund, where there's a 1.5 billion euros on the table that they need to grab. That's... They need funding from outside right now in order to sustain their budget. That's just the reality of it. They either need loans or they need grants from foreign entities. And right now, that's really they're able to do it, but that's the bottom line. Like, sure, you could squabble over a few of these resources and whether they should go to death benefits or soldiers, but at the end of the day, they need foreign funding. And so, we should pressure our governments to continue funding the Ukrainian budget because it's a very key aspect of all this. Cool. Anyone have any thoughts on that?
Nope.
Yeah, I'm usually alone on this. Is usually how Ukrainian politics goes. Joe spouts off his long opinion, and then everyone goes, "Nope." But this week I got my friend Bianade to talk about the law. So thank you, Bianade. And then, go ahead.
No, it's just nothing. Go good.
Yeah. So then next question is, I'm going to do my best to spin this about Ukraine. How would you interpret Trump's message about Macron being a different kind of guy and what he says doesn't matter? This is about him regarding Palestine. So I think we can use the transitive property to apply that to Ukraine. I would say that it's largely accurate. I'm not usually one to say that Trump is an incredibly accurate political rhetorician, but in this case, I would say the recent statement by Macron that they're not going to take part in the plan to purchase weapons from the U.S. through NATO to give to Ukraine was a real slap in the face. And it's another example of France having a lot of talk about, we're going to do this and we're going to do that, and we're going to stand up to Russia, and, we're going to be unpredictable. But the reality of their material support is extremely minimal. They've not even met the base. They've already promised a very small amount of resources, and even those promises haven't been fully kept. And Europe really had two choices when Russia started a land war in Europe. One was to invest heavily in European domestic weapons production. And the reality is they just haven't done that. Germany has made the most strides in that regard, and even they are woefully deficient. They would need to probably double or quadruple their current investments. And that's crazy to even say that. That's like a huge amount of money. France has done nothing even close to any of that. So the fact that they haven't gone all in on European domestic weapon production means they really only have one option. The US is the only country that produces certain things like missiles in quantities that are necessary for this industrial war between two states in Europe. And that's really because Europe dragged its feet on domestic weapons production. That's really the only alternative that's open to them now. obviously they should continue to. They are doing some European weapons production. They should continue that, and my argument is increase that. Like, I don't care where the weapons come from, but the reality is, if Ukraine needs weapons now, the only place they can really come from are the U.S. or maybe in the medium term European domestic production. And France is doing neither, and still talking about how they're some big leader of European security and all that. And it's just, you hear them say these things over and over, and you see the reality. And at a certain point, you just get frustrated and say, these guys are all talk, they're no action. And yeah, that's pretty much my take on France. I assume German aid to Ukraine feels roughly the same way, but if you have any thoughts on that, go ahead.
Yeah, not really sure if I want to go and trip into that honeypot. I'm gonna be what do you say in English? Decapitated somewhere in the French marketplace if I speak out. No, just I just have one example. For example, with France not really investing anything. Let's just take artillery, right? France is leading the Artillery Capability Coalition, which is the UDCG coalition, which covers everything related to artillery. Not rocket artillery, there's something different, but normal tube artillery. When it comes to investing into French production capacities of 155 shells, for example, France, after almost more than 3 years now, the whole country has not even half of the production capacity, not even close to half of the production capacity of just Rheinmetall, just one single German company, when it comes to that. In Germany, for example, because France didn't want to, financed 1.5 years worth of 155 production capacity from KNDS France. 1.5 years full financed by Germany. And then you see the artillery systems itself, and just in 2024, when this big announcement, what was it, like 72 Caesars could be delivered to Ukraine. And, Caesars is a very good system, don't get me wrong. It's a great artillery system. But it's, artillery system mounted on a basic truck, so it's very cheap. And France wanted to cover like a very small amount, and everything else should be funded by others. And, then you see... And everything that is just a couple of 100 million euros, not even close, Then you see Germany casually financing like more than $1 billion worth of artillery production by its own, not getting funds from somebody else. And yeah, that goes through, in my understanding. I'm of course not professional, and that doesn't mean that it's the case for all sectors of military industrial production or whatever, but at least when it comes to my understanding, this goes through all sectors of stuff where France just says we need funding, we need to invest, and we can, but nobody does. And France itself also doesn't want to, because I've been informed by French people that France has a huge debt and money problem, and that's the reason why they're not spending as much and announce big stuff and don't keep their words afterwards. I'm not sure if that's really an adequate reason, to be honest, especially given what consequences Europe could face if we don't invest heavily and arm ourselves up to the teeth. But that's up to the French to decide, not me, to be honest. And that's all I want to say.
Yeah, I think, we'd be more than happy. Like, we just go by what the reality is. And if France was, offering real material support, and they are, like, to a certain extent they are, but just not on the scale of like, Germany or countries that are taking it more seriously, like the Baltic states or Norway or Sweden or Denmark or the Netherlands. Like, they're just not in that league of countries that have really taken this threat to European security seriously. And I think if they want to be taken seriously, they're going to have to back up a lot of their statements with some real commitments. Otherwise, they're just going to be viewed. I don't know how important it is to win the respect of Trump, or to to have him believe that you're going to follow through. It probably is kind of important, but I don't know how you go about doing it. But I would say a lot of leaders in the world probably don't take France's security statement super seriously, because they don't see a lot of backing up of it. So, it is what it is. Yep.
One thing I just want to say, because not everything about France is bad, right? They have great, like Macron has great political support, like from a from a PR standpoint and from I have your back. That's really good what they are doing. And, they have given substantial amounts of assistance, especially when it comes to Ukrainian standoff weapons, right? The provision of SkyPG, for example, was a huge success and was very, very important. And especially as far as I understood, John and others from Tochnyi told me, for example, that France has given them that, and not or unlike Germany and other countries which were really afraid of the Ukrainian capabilities to actually use these weapons efficiently, France has just given them and said, do what you want. I don't think that would be possible with Germans, for example, and this is a great thing about France. So there are very good things about French support and French defense and whatever, but there are many bad things. I just want to clarify that not everything about France is bad. There are very, very good things about them, about their support. Sorry.
Yeah, I agree. Credit where it's due, and it's good to end on a positive note because, we do we want to recognize any positive contributions, and France has made positive contributions, and I think you outlined a couple of very good ones. Cool. So next question is there anything about the China sanctions from the EU, especially regarding the dual-purpose engines being sent and the amount of Chinese parts in Russian weapons? So the amount of Chinese parts in Russian weapons, as far as I know, has been relatively consistent. There have been a few specific procedural changes and all that, but this week there was a story that I probably should have reported on in my report that was basically that there was a Chinese company that was exporting engines directly to Russia that were being used in drones, and they were labeling them as cooling units. My general hot take on this is just to kind of oversimplify the whole thing. I did report on another story of a Indian company that was sending explosive materials to a Russian company directly. My general impression of both of these incidents is you're seeing a stronger testing of the sanctions regime. You have companies trying to put out feelers and seeing if there's going to be any consequences for doing this stuff. And if there aren't any consequences, we're probably going to see more companies start doing it. And I think the reason that that's happening now is probably because of the lack of enforcement from the US. I think that, or at the very least, the perceived lack of enforcement. In other words, I think that both China and India and other countries are looking at, because right now the current system is find dual use goods like engines, send them to some third party country like Kazakhstan, whose imports to Russia have suddenly skyrocketed 1,200%, right? Mysteriously, or Turkey or wherever, and then export it through. But that's kind of expensive. So in order to do this all cheaper and more directly, it's easier to just find some way to export directly to Russia. And so that's what they're trying to do now. That's what they're trying to move the goalpost a bit to where they won't get sanctioned if they do that. And we'll see. I think the reason behind that is because they're thinking that the Trump administration probably won't sanction them for that. And if that's the case, the sanction regimes in the world have mostly been successful when Europe and the US are aligned on them. If Europe and the US say that you can't do something or there'll be sanctions and they mean it, usually countries can't do it. But in the case where the US or Europe disagree and it's only the US or Europe doing it, there's enough wiggle room in there to kind of get around it. So that's my general opinion is that they're currently testing the sanctions regime with these schemes. Stanimir, did you want to add anything about that or contradict anything I said?
Not really. They are testing it, but they are also afraid from what we've heard.
Yeah, I would agree. Up until now, we've seen relative restraint from a lot of companies. They seem content to continue with this system of using third-party countries and paying the markup. And, it is what it is. And it's the cost of doing business, and they accept it. Cool. Next question.
There is something that I can add that the route via Kazakhstan is no longer that viable because of the operation by the Ukrainian SBU, because now there's a 2-month waiting period, 2-week waiting period if you're moving goods and equipment through Kazakhstan and the Kazakh-Russia border. But they aren't checking anything on the Russian-Chinese border.
Yeah, and then there's a lot of little countries like Kyrgyzstan and certain others. But yeah, as you said, there are efforts to like curtail this other system of third-party countries, and yeah, hopefully it'll get more sophisticated in the future. That leads to another question for you, Stanimir, which is the media like to mention that Russia will struggle to afford to pay to continue the war by the end of 2025 or mid-2026. This has been commented by like Budanov and I think a few other people that like Russia will face really serious problems by the end of this year. Do you agree, Stanimir, that this is the case, or do you think that they can continue like sacrificing aspects of the civilian economy to continue?
So what I can say that on the regional level, they've already sacrificed significant parts of the civilian economy. So there is a subsidy in Russia in the places where it gets really cold, that there's a subsidy for you to pay your connection to the local heating or gas company. So that subsidy in some regions is being canceled, so there's enough money to pay bonuses for the Russian soldiers to sign up. And we're talking places like Yakutia, which is in the Arctic Circle. So they're already cannibalizing parts of the domestic economy. We're already seeing that domestic economy struggle and collapse. We've seen that with the auto market that we talk about today. And one thing that I didn't mention about KAMAZ, 40% of its production in 2024 was Russian domestic military consumption. So that was just military trucks. Ural is currently being kept afloat by a contract for 1,200 trucks a month. But the Russian government can't afford the same contract with as much of the capacity of KAMAZ, because KAMAZ builds several times more than Ural every year. So they're already having to cut parts of the economy just to keep the war economy going. We've seen with Russian state purchases for WAZ, which we didn't mention, but it's also struggling. We've seen them cut the purchases of vehicles. And when it comes to WAZ, some of the vehicles go directly to security structures. So Army, FSB, the border guards are under FSB, OMON. So we're talking the Russian Guard. They're already cutting security services and their purchases from the civilian economy. So we're at that point where they're starting to cannibalize, and the Russian financial minister is talking about actually cutting the budget and reducing the spending. So they're already at the point where they have to choose what to cut to continue spending at the same amount.
Yeah, I think it's accurate to say like 2026 will be a turning point in a certain way for like the Russian economy and war effort. Like they are genuinely emptying certain major depots of like old equipment. Like we have guys that monitor that. Just, you know, they just sit there all day and look at satellite photos of like military depots with vehicles, and you know, they're genuinely emptying out. And I think you're seeing a kind of a similar, like that's sort of a metaphor for the Russian like economy and war effort in general. We are going to see, I think, a pretty, I don't know, significant, they're starting to run out of stuff, money and all that stuff. So this is a sort of a turning point. I think 2026, they will have to adjust course a bit. But I think overall, like there's like a civilian economy works in such a way that like you can take things out of it now and the effects won't be felt for like decades or like, you know, a decade or something. So like, you know, they can still gut the education system and you won't see the effects of that like until further down the road and things like that. So I don't think that they're going to like give up, although they should. But I do think that you'll see a significant change in how they approach this just because they genuinely are running out of stuff. Go ahead, Stanimir.
Yeah, I would actually say that the time where I expect the cannibalization to go into full force and for them to even cut military spending is probably the second half of 2025. The agricultural sector isn't doing well. They're cutting animals. The only part of the agricultural sector when it comes to livestock that's growing is pork, and that's for exports to China. The grain market is collapsing. Grain producers are actually going bankrupt at an alarming rate. Something that one of my followers mentioned that was weird, that during a war, Russian steel production is collapsing and steel demand is collapsing. We're mid-war and this is happening. So we're already seeing that collapse that the military spending has forced on them.
Yep. So thanks for the question. I think it's good question. We'll have to see, but I think broadly speaking, yes. I think this is like kind of a turning point this year. I think that's kind of accurate. Cool. And then there's a bunch of like discussion about our little political talk. Basically, someone mentioned the law was voted on by a large majority, and they seem to be okay with that. Like, what are your thoughts? And I think like I said, that's accurate. There's no laws were broken, no authority was abused. But as the famous politician Talleyrand once said, this was worse than a crime. It was a mistake, right? Even though everything that was done was above board and legal and everything, in my opinion, they made a mistake. They did it all legally, but to what end, right? So that's like my view of it. But yeah, you're absolutely correct that this was a legal law that was like put into force through legal means and by a president elected by the population. Like there was no abuse of power at any stage of this. It's just a question of like whether or not people were satisfied with that law and whether or not the potential benefits of that law outweigh the risk that they've put the EU accession process in. So, that's it. My opinion is it wasn't worth that risk and it wasn't worth the backlash. But of course, you're welcome to make up your own mind on that. I'm not that's a subjective question, right? Cool. And then there's a bunch more talk about it's good you guys are talking about this. So I think it's important. And then more people talking Ukrainian politics, calling my opinion wrong. It's again, a lot of this is I try to be clear what's my opinion, what's fact. My opinion, you're totally welcome to dismiss it and form your own opinion. I'm not here to tell you how to think. What's your opinion on Europe's strategy to prioritize and reserve its own military in preparation of a Russian threat instead of directing to Ukraine? I think at Tochnyi, we are of the opinion that like Europe should be just giving basically everything possible to Ukraine. Like $1 spent in Ukraine today is $10 worth of the security budget for Europe that doesn't need to be spent in 2030. That's like, I think our general opinion. Gao, Stanimir, if you guys have anything you want to say about it as Europeans, you're welcome.
No, I absolutely agree. I mean, there are certain things which, you can't simply dismiss, or just simply hand over, because to use an example of the Patriot situation, right? I've seen people arguing, I mean, it's Twitter, right? But I've seen people arguing, what does Germany need them for? Just, send them 3 or send them 5. You have them. And I mean, of course we have, but with our orders right now, you have to imagine we have placed orders for 8 fire units, 8 Patriot fire units. And the last one of these 8 Patriot fire units is not going to be delivered until 2030 or 2031. Just of these 8. And for every other replacement we need to take from the industry, it takes more time. But then you have to imagine that experts are saying that, for example, Russia is able, at least able, in 2029, so before Germany takes on, the last Patriot fire unit, just one example, to attack certain targets or certain territories of NATO. The experts are saying, for example, that one of the key points where Russia would attack and seize NATO territory would be in Lithuania, and Germany right now is building a combat brigade of 5,000 soldiers and a lot of equipment in Lithuania. Germany would be at the forefront of a very likely Russian advance in 4 years. And every equipment we're giving away right now endangers the lives of at least 5,000 German soldiers on the front line where Russia would attack. And so it's not that easy. I completely agree that every money is spent or every euro spent on Ukraine right now means maybe 10 euros saved in the long term. But it's not that easy of just, handing over certain equipments because we are not in a war right now. Because we will maybe in 4 years, and we won't have the time to replace all of that in that time. Just want to say the same for tanks, right? It takes 2 years for a new Leopard tank to come from the factory to the Bundeswehr. So I guess I made my point.
Yeah, no, it's a totally legitimate thing, and that is probably the primary reason governments exist at all. Is the security of their population, and it's totally reasonable for a government not to want to compromise the security of its own population. Like, that's an understandable impulse. But generally speaking, I would say that it's mostly a good thing when European countries are like the Netherlands or Denmark are say things like, "Hey, let's just give them all of our artillery pieces." I think that was a good move overall. And I think if Europe just gives it to Ukraine now, then they'll take it more seriously to replace it later. But I think Germany, to Ukraine's point, still stands that it's a totally valid concern for a government to be concerned with its own population security, probably the most valid concern of any government. So it's not as simple as just giving Ukraine everything. Obviously, governments need to be able to defend their populations for ethical and basic reasons. Go ahead.
And I just want to point out that just because like Denmark has given their all of their artillery pieces, that was a great move. I absolutely agree. Like, as we should have gotten as much military equipment as fast as possible to Ukraine for them to fully utilize it. I absolutely agree. The thing is, one shouldn't always compare Denmark to other countries like Germany or Poland or whatever, right? Because when Denmark donates all of its artillery pieces, that's one thing. But Denmark is, on the one side you have a big ocean, on the other side you have Germany as a massive protector. So I think it would be completely different when Germany, for example, would hand over all of their artillery pieces or all of their tanks or whatever.
I think you could make that case, but you could also make the same case for a country in the Baltic, right? And they've given Ukraine a pretty high amount. So I don't know. I think yes.
Yeah, but from their honest question, from their own stocks, I mean, they give certain amounts of, they have a very, very high percentage of what they are providing in terms of money. That's true. I mean, it's like overall, it's just a drop in the ocean. But in terms of what they're providing per percentage, it's true. But how much of that are they actually providing from their own stocks? That's the key question. If they're actually just giving money, right? So one example, Lithuania, for example, pledged to donate, I believe it was like 6 Ember 1800 air surveillance radars, which is very good, more air coverage, all of that, as part of the German AID initiative. But all of that is not coming from their stocks. They're actually newly producing that for Ukraine. So that's the question, right? Because when they're giving from their own stocks, your point stands. I totally agree. But as far as I know, they are mostly financing stuff with money, and that's easier said than not easier said than that's a lot easier than actually providing from your own resources, as Denmark did, for example.
Yeah, I think like to simplify it, I think you're basically correct that like Estonia, which is the best example that makes me look the most right, so I'm going to go with that, gave like its all of its post-Soviet stocks to Ukraine, and then put in a bunch of orders for like NATO weapons, and then since then they've mostly been financing, and they haven't been arguably compromising their own military readiness for Ukraine. I think that's like a fair characterization, but. I think it's definitely a balance. I think that's that's what we're trying to say here. There's a balance between giving your own equipment to help Ukraine and protecting yourself. I think one thing that Europe can and should do is just start producing more military equipment. The less that this is a conundrum for them, where they have to go, oh, do we need the weapons for ourselves or for Ukraine? The less difficult decisions they have to make in the future. So, I think basically, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure in both of these cases. If Europe builds more weapons now and gives more weapons to Ukraine now, it's a good thing. But obviously, it's a practical balance between what you can do and what you should do. Cool. So next question. A lot of talk about France. We really
wait! You forgot me.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And Joseph, like, what the hell?
Yeah. I'm more of the opinion that Bulgarian stocks should actually be emptied and sent, because our stocks can be relatively old, and with us being in such a position with NATO and Russia being antagonists, we can't meaningfully upgrade them. So there's no upgrade options, for example, for a T-72s that is meaningful or provide something more than what we can get in a completely new tank. So I think all of those stocks should be given to Ukraine, which can service them and then use them.
thank you, Stanimir. I definitely should have let you go because you're supporting my side of the fake argument we made between me and Germany to Ukraine. Cool. So that means I was right. Moving on. I think there was one question about that was a little earlier. I don't remember what it was.
Yeah, jumping back and forth, huh?
Yeah, there was one question about nationalization and like, will it help I assume like the Russians, but I think we covered that mostly last week. There was a company that was going bankrupt in Russia, nationalized it. But is there any like developments on that front, Samir?
You have to be more specific about the company. They nationalize a lot of things.
Yeah, I think, as a general trend, it's happening. I don't know if I think it's probably bad. Like long term, it's bad for the Russian economy. Like short to medium term, it's probably like, fine. Like it's more resources they can plunder to use for the war. But yeah, long term.
I wouldn't even say medium term, because we had one case of Russia's biggest canned food company, which was actually operated under a parent company from the U.S. because it was run by a Russian immigrant who went to the U.S. and then came back and started a business after the 90s. Even in the short term, their sales dropped considerably after being taken over by the state. So they're not good stewards of property. The Russian Federal Asset Management Agency isn't good at this. And I think it's getting overloaded with other companies.
Yeah, it's a good point that they're sort of to some extent by doing this transitioning more to like a state-run economy, and like their state doesn't really have the administrative capacity to like even really do that right now. They would have to reform their administration to meaningfully have a state-run economy. So yeah, it's a real weird position they're putting themselves in. Yeah, I don't know. I thought I saw one other question, but I can't find it. So I guess we can probably wrap it up. Did you see any other questions you wanted to cover, Mr. Germinade?
Not that I've seen. No, no, I don't think so.
Yeah, so I mean, that was a very again, chat. Thank you for your questions. I thought they were good. So it's nice to keep us on our toes. I think you don't always have to ask like super easy questions for us. I don't mind things being a little spicy or difficult. So we appreciate it. We appreciate your questions. Thanks for tuning in, guys. We appreciate, of course, your viewership and your support, liking and subscribing. All that stuff that you guys do really helps us out. We live by the mercy of your support. Basically, the YouTube algorithm ain't doing us any favors. So thanks so much, guys. Thanks, of course, to our panel. Thank you for Bianade for coming on this week. And thanks, of course, to my regular panel, Stanimir, Mr. Germinade to Ukraine. And, of course, Mr. Germinade makes me thank myself.
Yeah.
He also calls me his bitch, so I don't know why I'm doing what he...
That's nicely meant.
I'm doing what he says, so I guess it's true. Thank you, me. Yeah, of course, thank you to our audience. You guys are great. Thanks to our live audience. Thanks to our audience who watches after the fact. We, of course, broadcast every Sunday at 2100 Kyiv time. So, yeah, feel free to tune in each week. We'll see everyone next week. Slava Ukraini.
Herum Slava.
On behalf of the brave.